For those who want to follow along, there it is. And for those just joining us, whether on the live stream or on the YouTube, hello everybody, and welcome back. This is week 8 of our Millennium Microcosm interlude about human natures. This interlude is an answer to Ari's question about a comment I made about Kenneth's interpretation of modernity as characterological genocide against the eristic character type, against the Aristoi. And I must have said that. Oh, it's 2 months ago now. And he said, "What do you mean by that? I need to know more about that. It's too important." And David and I talked about it and thought about it. And we said, yeah, we should talk more about character types. Chapter 4 of this book only briefly talks about the character types when it's summarizing the ancient worldview, but it's a major part of the ancient worldview. So maybe there should be a whole nother chapter inserted after chapter 4. And so that's kind of what we're doing. We're taking Kenneth Smith's Human Natures paper and we're going through it together where it's one of his more succinct works talking about character types. And we're supplementing it with a bunch of fragments from all over Kenneth Smith's writing, where he talks about characterological genocide. And David's found a bunch of them, and I've put them in an order, and we're going to cover those too. So we'll go back and forth between the fragments from all over Kenneth's stuff and then this one paper. We have previously gone through the abstract and the prefatory caution, and we're halfway through the intro, and that's where we're picking up today. So I posted the paper there. Here is the outline, just a reminder, the outline of the paper. I'll drop it into the chat for reference for people. And why don't we just get started? Since you've got the whole text, I'm not going to paste the stuff from before. I am going to paste what we covered last week on the first half of paragraph 14, just for continuity. But that's what we already talked about. What we're actually talking about this week is the second half of this paragraph, which I'm pasting in now. And I'll read through the first half from last week just for continuity, and then I'll read the first sentence of the second half, and we'll get into chewing on that. The last two paragraphs of the intro are paragraphs 14 and 15, and they're very chewy. There's lots of interesting stuff here. All right, so first half of paragraph 14 from last week. What can all this mean as a manifestation of the inner shape of personality and human essence in our time? We talked about how essence means character. This is existential essence. The whole world of culture, of course, is something man does to himself, draws out of himself, aims toward, obeys implicitly as his own intimate voice to himself, and is thus fulfilled by, regardless of how he is penalized or self-alienated by it. Culture is the domain of artifice. Man originates and grows out of his own human impulses, the realm of fabricated, spun nature over which he plays God. As little as he comprehends and controls his own obscure self, his character, that much more will he be tyrannized by totalitarian and excoriating forms of culture. This is what we talked about last week. And a lot of what we talked about last week was this idea, Kenneth mentioned it elsewhere too, that the artificial human world that we create around us, whether it's the culture, whether it's the buildings and the streets, whether it's the systems of law or the economies, all of these things, they seem to have an objective reality, right? I mean, a building is an actual thing. You can hit it, you can touch it, and so is a law code in that people are following it in the sense they take you to court and they hold you accountable to it. You end up in jail or you don't end up in jail, depending on how well you conform to it. That gives it a certain objective reality. And yet, as Kenneth says, what's weird about all this stuff is that all of it comes from our subjectivity. In the modern world, we try to separate the objective and the subjective into two completely different realms. But the existentialist philosophical tradition breaks that down and shows how it actually has a paradoxical relationship. Everything objective that we make originates from inside our subjectivity, our creativity, our imagination, the rules we've learned for how you make a chair or a table. All of this stuff is inside of us. And we're projecting that subjectivity outside of ourselves when we make things, whether we make things as homo faber, as a benausos, as a craftsperson who's making things, whether we make them, in governance, in passing laws or setting precedents. It's weird. These are constructions. These are things we make. And this is where we get into some interesting stuff this week. Yeah, I'm not gonna belabor too much what we talked about last week. We did it already. So let's just dive right into the next piece of text. Let's get some new text going. So we're talking about man, and he talked about this idea that the consequence is if the things that you're building in the world around you come from inside your own character, if you don't know your character, then you won't understand what you've made and why you've done it. And you'll feel like you're a victim, even when you're the one that created the thing that's victimizing you. You see what I mean? It's like someone hits you over the head with a hammer. You made that hammer. You built that. This is your hammer that you built. And you hit yourself in the thumb with it when you're trying to hammer. Who do you have to blame? It's your hammer, and you were the one wielding it. So there is this thing where it's there is a temptation in the moment of suffering to try to distance ourselves from the source of the suffering and say, "Oh, someone has done this to me." And sometimes it's true. Someone has done this to you. But an enormous amount of the time, the things that go wrong are things that we had a hand in. Like I was the one wielding the hammer that hit my thumb. And so, yeah, I shouldn't be blaming the hammer manufacturer or, some guy who was talking to me. It was my job not to hit myself in the thumb with my hammer. And I didn't do my job correctly. I'm feeling oppressed by what I'm accusing of being an objective thing, but actually it's a subjective thing that came from within me. And the existentialist take on all this is that the relationship between the objective and subjective is dialectical. So most things are a mix, right? Some things come from outside of us, some things come from inside of us. And it's the confluence between the two that determines what the outcome is. And sometimes there's a lot of external, and we just feel like, we're passive victims. These things are just happening. And we might be right. A landslide comes down. It had nothing to do with us. I wasn't the logger that logged all the trees off this hillside, and now it turns into a mud slope and slides down. This happens in the Northwest all the damn time. When we're not careful about where we log, we cause mudslides, and then we pretend it's an act of nature. But we did it. We were the ones that knew that was a heavy slope, and we should have left the trees on that slope. It's part of the planning that we have to do. So sometimes you can, but sometimes, if Mount Rainier goes off, that had nothing to do with us. Okay, that's a problem for us. That's all contingency. It's all the external nature. But a lot of the times it's a mix. And sometimes it's almost entirely us. I get in some fight with some guy in some place that I've never been before. Why did I even go there in the first place? Why did I pick the fight with the guy? Why didn't I just walk away? I contributed to it. And I may not feel like I want to be responsible. I may want it to all be his fault. And I may tell everybody, oh, for no reason whatsoever, he did this. But, that might be leaving out the fact that I glared at the guy beforehand. And he was like, what? What are you glaring at me about? And I'm like, what? I didn't do anything, but I did glare at him. Maybe I didn't like his shirt or something. There's ways in which these things combine. So the point is, when we talk about as individuals, we have this dialectic. But when we talk about humanity as a whole, it gets a lot messier because humanity as a whole, as Aristotle said, is largely responsible for most of the things that go wrong for humanity as a whole. When we were, living in the forest long time ago and leopards could eat our faces, yeah, we were prey animals. I mean, many things were not our fault. But we're at a point now where our technology exceeds that of any other animal, and we build all this, as Phil says, nature too. We build cities and towns and roads and houses, and we've really shoved the wilderness way back. I mean, to the point where it's collapsing now and it's causing problems. But very few things in our day-to-day life are the fault of the nature around us. Almost everything that we suffer from as people, if it's not caused by us individually, it's still caused by us as a people, as a species. We did this. We made this. Man, God, and nature, as Stephen says. Yes. Yes. And so we have this problem that we, and this is where he ended the first half of that paragraph. We we suffer being tyrannized by forces that we have ourselves unleashed. and that we contribute to. We pay our taxes. The taxes are used to hire the police who then hit us over the head with the club. I mean, there's these feedback loops that we don't want to talk about because we want things to be simple. I'm the good guy. I didn't do anything wrong. You're the bad guy and you did this to me. But we're all woven together into these complex relationships. We have a hand in all kinds of things that happen. Oh no, the immigrants are coming. Well, where are they coming from? They're coming from El Salvador. Why are they coming from El Salvador? Well, because for a century, the United States propped up dictatorship after dictatorship in El Salvador, and they treated the people like shit. And the country has a lot of problems now, and a lot of people don't want to be there anymore. The United States did that to El Salvador, so some people have to leave El Salvador, and where are they going to go? Well, they'll come to the United States because it's not as awful here. There's these, we can pretend that for no reason whatsoever they're invading us. But the truth is, if we'd left them alone, they'd have stayed there. El Salvador was a nice place before we set up all the dictatorships and the juntas and the armies and the genocide, right? I mean, we made these places awful. People left them because they were awful and they came here. And then we said, oh, who could have foreseen that somebody would come here? Well, anybody could have foreseen that they would come here. And Latin American history is a thing I've been studying since the 70s. So I'm well acquainted with these stupid feedback loops that the United States is engaged in. Uh, all these people, tens of millions of Americans, are screaming about the immigrants and not willing to acknowledge that our own policies generated most of these immigrants. It's stupid. It's like the guy who piles the boxes too high in the storeroom and then they fall on his head and he says, who has oppressed me? What terrible person has hit me on the head? Well, I did. I'm the one who stacked the boxes there. That was me. Right? I mean, this is even 2,500 years ago. Aristotle's looking around at the human world, and man, they did not have the science and technology we have today. Even then, he's saying most of our problems are us. The Pogo cartoon where it says we've met the enemy and he is us. There is a certain existential wisdom here, and this is what Kenneth is talking about. But he's talking about it here specifically in the mode that the Greeks understand character and culture as being intimately related to each other. This is a paper about character types. And what he's trying to say is culture doesn't come from nowhere. It's not some random thing that happened. People didn't just happen to turn out that way. We generate cultures from inside ourselves. We like he said last time, it's like a spun nature over which we play God. What shall we do today? What would you like to eat for dinner? Should we dig a well? Should we build a house? What are the things that we do together are the habits that come up because we think of the things that make sense to us to do. And the reason they make sense to us, the reason anything makes sense to us, is because our character is compatible with it. Our character says, oh, yes, this is the sort of thing I like, or no, no, that is not the sort of thing I like. We're not going to be doing that. Our character pushes back against the culture and shapes it in a feedback loop. And like we talked about last time, the feedback loop gets complicated because when we're born, right, all the character that we have in us is whatever we genetically picked up. And then after that, our character starts being shaped by our parents, by our other relatives, by the friends that we meet, our acquaintances. That is, our culture begins shaping our character. And it shapes us to the point that we can start being an actor in our own lives. And the moment we start acting in our own lives, now we're starting to shape the culture back, right? The parents think that they can put the kid to bed in a certain way, but they have a child who's born a different way, and this kid cries when they do that. And they either have a miserable time as parents or they clue in and they put the kid to get to bed differently, and now the kid doesn't cry, and the parent's culture has changed. What happens in the household has changed because of the feedback loop. Every parent recognizes this. I mean, no child comes out exactly the way you think that they will, and they push back, don't they? They cry, and we do not like it when they cry. So we shape them and they shape us, and the feedback loop is complicated. And what the Greeks said is that's exactly what's happening on a larger scale over, vastly more people and vastly more time. That's where cultures come from, is this feedback loop. And that's where our characters come from, is the push and pull. I like this, I don't like this, of the relationship between the character and the culture. So he's bringing this up in the intro because we're about to get into the stuff. This is the next section is where we get into the meat of the paper proper. and start talking about, what is the nature of character and what are the three character types. And in that he'll talk about characterological genocide. But he's given
Rick,
us, yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Rick, there's a word in here. I'm just wondering, abstract prefatory caution or is it prefactory? I'm just wondering if it's misspelled or it's a new word that I'm familiar. Is it
Prefatory. Prefatory.
prefactory?
No, no, prefatory. Like a preface.
Oh,
Yeah,
prefatory.
prefatory caution. Prefatory
Okay.
caution. That's what we were doing
I,
about a month
I
ago.
thought you misspelled prefactory caution.
No, no. That's
Preface. Okay,
prefatory
thank you.
caution. He's just saying,
Okay.
even before we get into the intro, he wanted to caution us. So we talked about that. So in the intro here, we're talking about this feedback loop between character and culture. And we're talking about the way that many of the things that we suffer and do not like are the things that human beings have created themselves in manufacturing their culture the way they have. That is, our subjectivity, we spun it out into the world. We created a nature too full of buildings and houses and roads and laws. And if we don't like it, who do we have to blame but ourselves as a species? We did that. Other species would have done something entirely different with their natural world. We chose to do this, and now if we don't like the consequences, well, welcome to the law of unintended consequences. That's what it is to be an actor in the world. And this is one of the themes we're going to talk about today. This is where literal-minded people, Duloi and Banalsoi, have stupid ideas about strength, right? If I get angry, I should punch somebody in the face, right? You made me do it. It's not my fault. You made me angry. This is how a doulos relates to his anger. My anger oppresses me. I can't, I have no choice. You made me punch you. It's like, no, I didn't. You could separate the stimulus and the response. You could feel the anger like seeing the color red. You see the color red, you don't have to charge the cape. You could just say, yep, that's red. You could feel the anger and not go, I break things. You could feel the anger and go, huh, that made me angry. How interesting. I wonder why. And I wonder what I should do about it. You can separate the stimulus and response. But to do that, you have to be willing to separate yourself from the live wire of raw experience. And a doulos doesn't want to do that. Only a Banalsos wants to do that. And then eventually an Aristos. That separation can be done, but the character of the person makes them willing or unwilling to do the separation. And so you end up with a bunch of people in jail who have anger management problems. And the anger management problem they have is they don't want to be separated from their feelings by having to wait and consider what their choices are about how to respond to their feelings. They want to just be a whole person who feels and reacts instantly because that feels right to them. And it feels right to them because that's their character. So, feedback loops, right? The relationship between character and culture. He says, he lives in the bed he made. The logic of culture, no matter how perverse or pathological, is the unfolding of a people's character. Its inward self-fatedness. So let's unpack this a little bit. There's some good stuff here. And before I do, let's call on Donald. Donald, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I just want to recall that not 3 months ago, we were talking about we could categorize cultures by how they ranked God, nature, and man. And now we can also are getting to, we can sort of understand cultures by how they, I wouldn't say rank, but how they're composed of various character types and what roles those character types get to play. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is culture's kind of overdetermined. There are a lot of factors by which you can categorize culture. You know,
Yeah, that's an important point. I mean, we've talked about the triad, and Stephen, 10 minutes ago mentioned it, in the chat. So, the ancient world puts nature first, then God, then man. The medieval world overthrows nature. It puts God, then man, then nature. And then finally, the modern world overturns God, as Nietzsche protested against and Kierkegaard protested against. And so we end up with man, then nature, then God. So this is one existentialist way of looking at, and when we look at this, we have to remember it's just a sketch. It's scaffolding. It's just a help. This isn't a system. It's not designed to replace direct observation of the real world and honoring what's real. So I've been reading a lot of Hannah Arendt this week, and this is one of her central points: is where people go wrong and become ideological is when they treat their prostheses as though they are reality itself. It's like the model is not reality. The moment you think the model is what's real, that's the moment you start to slip into totalitarianism. The ideology has become a substitute for reality. So the proper existentialist way of taking this is that these are just sketches. These are sketches of priorities. The ancient world put nature first, and even the gods are under nature. And in I'm reading an essay right now by Hannah Arendt from Between Past and Future, and it's called The Concept of History, Ancient and Modern. Right there, and that's from Between Past and Future uh, by Hannah Arendt, her book of essays. Uh, and that one you can find on the Internet Archive. It's available for free. It's in her 6 chapter version from the early 60s. The full book has 8 chapters. She added the 2 chapters late in the 60s. But I think this essay is there. But anyway, in it, she actually talks about this issue that the ancient world saw was a cosmos. They saw the cosmos as pre-existing the gods, that the gods did not make the cosmos, but were part of it. All this stuff Kenneth Smith says, she says in this essay, which is fascinating. The more I read Hannah Arendt, the more I can see Kenneth, young Kenneth, Kenneth the student catching fire, reading her and going, ooh, that's some interesting, juicy stuff. There's a lot of Hannah Arendt and Kenneth. Anyway, so this idea that Stephen brought up is an important reminder, and there's the sketch of it. But as Donald says, part of what this essay is saying is there is another way to think about cultures that is also existentialist, and that is if it's true that there's a feedback loop between character and culture, if man lives in the bed he made because the logic of the culture, whether we like it or not, is nevertheless the unfolding of the people's character as a group, how all their different characters combine together, what they emit and spin out into the world together becomes the culture that shapes the next generation and that shapes them throughout their lives as well. So you can, as Donald said, ask questions like, what happens if your culture has a lot of douloi? What happens if your culture has a lot of Banausoi? What happens if your culture has a lot of Aristoi? Well, how does this affect the shape and the structure of the culture and its ability to do the work that Homo sapiens needs culture to do? And these are critical questions for Kenneth. This paper is all about that, and so are lots of other things he's written. Once you're attuned to it, once you're looking for it. But right here in this paragraph 14, he's basically flat out saying it. And he's saying it because the intro is trying to caution us. It's like we are not going to, because of the culture that has shaped us, which is heavily Banausic, very systematized, very mathematized. What number is your intelligence? What number is your wealth? What number is your votes that allows you to get into office or not get into office? We're counters. We're bean counters. It's Banausic. And that's what we've been educated in, right? When did we start learning arithmetic? Kindergarten. We started learning arithmetic. And it was all the way through, relentlessly, all the way through school. They're like, you're going to learn a lot of numbers. And we're going to try to turn everything else into numbers too. It's numbers are very important to the modern world. And so the result is that the culture that is shaping us and our language and our ability to conceive of things is a heavily Banausic culture. And if we don't like the fact that it makes a machine world and wants to treat people as machines that it can discard or throw into the bus, well, we made it. We made that. We and our ancestors made this the way it is. And if we don't like it, we should change it. This is one of the things that cultures and civilizations like to do is pretend that they're inevitable. I'm not an artificial thing created by people. I am speaking in the medieval world, they'd say, I'm speaking for God himself. This is God put me in charge. I have the divine right. That's why I'm king. Maybe God put him there, but maybe God didn't put him there, right? I mean, maybe he's just some jerk, and now he's crowning himself with God's authority to try to get you to not overthrow him. And if you believe him, then you'll go along with all the stupid things he does as a ruler. But if you can see through it and see he's just a dude, well, then maybe you can change things. You could overthrow him and put somebody in charge who's not such an idiot. But it all has to do with whether you can recognize that this culture, the politics, the economics, all these things that oppress us are our own creation. And we can change it. Of course, we can change it. I mean, it wouldn't even be there if we hadn't changed whatever was there before into what it is now. So it's always being changed. It's always being created. As Stephen says, numbers are very important to the modern liberal. Numbers are also very important to the modern conservative. There is no modern person to whom numbers are not important because you'll go to jail. I mean, there are all kinds of numbers you have to keep track of. What is your driver's license number? What's your social security number? Have you paid the number of taxes you're supposed to pay? Have you followed the speed limit number that you're supposed to follow? There's numbers everywhere. It has nothing to do with liberals. I mean, it has everything to do with liberals in the same way it has everything to do with conservatives and everything to do with centrists, everything to do with fascists, everything to do with communists. Everybody's got numbers coming out of their ears. When we talk about the idea that to be modern is to be so inculcated in the modern worldview that even when you try to get out of the modern world, even if you throw a revolution, your idea about how to rebel is a modern idea. And you end up creating another modern society. Right? Lenin didn't create the Marxist utopia that is vaguely hinted at in Marx's writings. He created the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union is a modern country, or was a modern country. And so, as a modern country, they still counted everything. Everything was by numbers. The laws were by numbers. The economy is by numbers. Everything's by numbers. What is our 5-year the magic number? What is our 5-year plan? How much production of wheat? How much production of corn? How many cars? How many VCRs? Numbers, 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 numbers. We don't actually know how not to make a society that is obsessed with numbers. Which is why even when we're trying to overthrow the society, we make a new society that's still all about numbers. We're completely marinated in it. This is Banausos. This is the Banausic worldview. A Banausos trusts numbers and does not trust stupid things like, love or human worth. Ew, how squishy. Or, does this butterfly need this flower? I hate that stuff. Give me the numbers. Where's the profit for this quarter? I understand that. I can stick it in my spreadsheet and I get an answer, and I never have to stick my head and my neck out and pretend that and make a judgment of my own for which somebody could hold me accountable. Not me. I'm not doing it. The numbers did it. I'm sorry. We have a policy. A policy was established. I didn't make the policy. Don't blame me. If things go wrong, I should not be held accountable. Talk to the numbers. They have nothing to do. I have nothing to do with it. You see the same thing when government agencies are attempting to apologize, which they always try to avoid doing. But when they say, what do they say? Mistakes were made. By whom? There's a cowardice in this, right? The numbers are about cowardice. If the numbers tell us what we should do every minute of our lives, like good little cogs in a machine that turn at the proper rate, then we can never be blamed for anything. We will never be the nail that sticks up. Nobody will ever hammer us down. It's not my fault. It's just the numbers. That's why the assassin comes with the gun and he sticks it to your head and he says nothing personal. He means don't blame me. I haven't taken any responsibility for my actions, so you certainly shouldn't blame me for my actions. I'm just following. I got paid some numbers. My bank account now has more numbers in it, and the numbers say I have to put this number of bullets in you. I'm sorry, but I'm not even a person. I'm just a calculation. This is very modern. And we can pretend that it's oppressing us, but we made it. No matter how inhuman And this is one of the core points that Kenneth is making here. No matter how inhumane, no matter how mechanical, no matter how dystopian it is in fact human, completely human, because we made it. We did it. And if we don't like it, then we might reflect on what Donald said. Whose character does this most illustrate? Which character dominated us in order to make a world like this? Which kind of human character? And if you like to think that we're all the same and we're all equal, then look around at all this mechanization that reduces people to being meaningless acorns under an oak tree. Right? This is a Banausic perspective. And that says we're all just grist for the mill, grind us up. And if you don't like it, tough. Look at that worldview, no matter how inhumane it is, and remind yourself this is a human thing. There is a human character type that thinks this way, that values this way, that interprets this way, and that's the Banausos. And if you think we're all the same, you have only to look at the world that the Banausoi made and say, is that what you would have wanted to make? Do you want little children being thrown under bulldozers? Because there are people who do, for whom children have no value other than their numbers on a spreadsheet. And these numbers are in the column that's red and they have to go. Nothing personal, right? This is a kind of human way of seeing the world. He starts out in the sense saying he lives in the bed he made. And of course, now we know the Greek, right? Which bed are we talking about? Procrustes. This is the bed of Procrustes, right? We all remember the story of the bed of Procrustes. And this is getting to this Greek idea that the myth of Procrustes, who tortures his guests to make them perfectly fit his bed, the Greeks understood that to be the way the human mind works. Our mind is shaped by our character to have certain expectations about how reality is supposed to behave. And when reality doesn't behave that way because it's not ours to order around, we torture the facts to make them seem to fit the bed of our mind. We omit all the evidence that we're wrong, and we cherry pick and collect all the evidence that we're right. And then we end up saying, see, I can prove that I'm right. I can prove that I'm not a Banausos who just happens to see the world this way because of my character. I can prove the world is this way. And my proof is I have excluded all the evidence to the contrary. And I've distorted all the evidence that I accept until it exactly fits my ideology. And thus I'm justified in, setting up concentration camps and sending secret police around the country. Of course I can, because that's the way the world works. And I know the world works that way because that's how I see the world. That's my bed. The bed he made, right? He lives in the bed he made. If we let Banausoi being in charge, then we're going to live in a Banausic world, a Banausic culture, because they're going to shape the culture to match their character, because that's what makes them comfortable. And when Banausoi are in a culture that will not allow them to do that, the Banausoi are really uncomfortable and they want to overthrow it, as happened in Athens in the lead up to the Peloponnesian War. The Banausoi got in charge and said, all this debating and discussing and, people getting along really well sucks. I want to be in charge of the trade of the Western Mediterranean. Let's start a war against Sparta, and then halfway through, let's expand the war and go to war against Sicily because I have this beautiful vision in which all the money flows through my pockets. And that vision is more important to me than, tradition or human rights or even the definition of a polis or politics. Those things don't matter. I don't even understand what you people are talking about when you talk about those things. The sacred, what the hell is that? I understand the number of drachmae in my pocket, and I'll have more drachmae if I just get everybody to go west and conquer Sicily. Let's start with Syracuse. We'll invade Syracuse. This can only end well. They could not foresee that they were destroying Athens, that everything that they were about to lose, everything that they had. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, but not to the Banausos. Right? The Banausos wanted two birds and ended up with no birds. Sparta ended up winning. And that was the end of the Athenian domination. And it was the beginning of the end of the Greek independence, after a series of civil wars. But they did it to themselves. Oh no, Sparta defeated us. No, you defeated yourself. Thucydides is very clear about this in the Peloponnesian War. The character of Athens was rotten, and it caused them to take actions that they had multiple opportunities to back away from. And over, they just refused to back away. They insisted on following the course that made sense to them. And that's how they destroyed themselves, by doing what felt right according to their character. And this leads us to a very contra-modern conclusion. The Greeks are saying not everybody should be in charge of the government. If you put Banauso in charge of the government, it's going to be the end of your civilization. They're going to make an awful mechanical thing, and everyone's going to hate living in it. Eventually, even the Banausoi will hate living in it, although it will satisfy them intellectually. But, all the things that break, that don't come out the way they want to, they'll always want to be blaming somebody else for that, even though they're the ones in charge. This is what he's talking about in paragraph 14, the feedback loop, character and culture, and the way that the difference between Douloi, Banausoi, and Aristoi that he wants to emphasize to start with is that Aristoi understand that they have to take responsibility for their role in the feedback loop. And Aristos is not a winner. And Aristos is not the richest person. And Aristos isn't the person who has the most soldiers, the most bombs. It isn't the person who's in charge. The whole notion that there are winners and losers, and the winners are Aristoi and the losers are everybody else, that's some modern bullshit. That is not the way that is not the way the best of the Greeks saw it. It's not the way Aristotle saw it. You can make a society in which the Aristoi are deprived of power. And that's the subject of this interlude, isn't it? The modern world makes sure that Aristoi are not in charge. Banausoi are in charge. And they make a Banausic culture that creates a Banausic world. All right, so this feedback loop stuff was some of what I wanted to talk about today. So let's go on to the next bit. It says, from Heraclitus through Hegel and Nietzsche, the sense that character is fate, that we can only become what we already implicitly are, has been the grim gospel of our most penetrating philosophers. So, of course, he actually says Heraclitus. What character is fate, obviously, ethos, anthropoi, daimon. And when he says character is fate, he doesn't just mean character is fate. That's an English arm-wavy approximation. He really means the full ethos, anthropoi, daimon. Your character is like a god who rules over you. And if your character is bad, then the god who rules over you is a bad god. He's going to make you do bad things. And if you don't like that, you better cultivate your character. Change your character and you change your God, and that lets you change your fate. You can relate to your character passively by just being what your character makes you. And then it really is a tyrant over you. Or you can learn to take responsibility for your character. Acknowledge the things that you do wrong. Acknowledge that they come from inside of you, that your subjectivity has issues, and really figure out, what would I have to do to myself to get control over those issues, to change my life into a better direction, and then take those actions so that you gradually, through the force of habit, change your character, and now you change your fate. This is implicit in what he's writing here. He's not explicitly citing it. He's talking about the grimness and the fate and the inevitability. He's talking about half of the picture. But when he talks about this half, he also means the other half. Kenneth means the full dialectic, even if he's not citing it in this moment. And it's very important. In fact, it's important to this paragraph. Because if we could acknowledge that we're capable of taking responsibility for our character, then, and if we could acknowledge the dialectic between character and culture, then we would be able to acknowledge that we can also take responsibility for our culture, right? The character and the culture are related. If we can take responsibility for our character, we can take responsibility for our culture. We don't have to passively suffer the things that are done to us. We can get out and change the society, push it in better directions. Think about what's wrong with it, what's broken with it. How do we fix those things? How do we make them better? And when we say that we can do this stuff, ethos anthropoi daimon includes implicit within it the notion that, in fact, we are obligated to do that. Because if we don't take responsibility for our own character, for the bullshit in our own character, if we don't take responsibility for the bullshit in our own culture, what we're effectively doing is inflicting that bullshit on everybody else and pretending it's not our fault. Who left all these dirty dishes in the sink? I have no earthly idea. Well, it was me. I left the dirty dishes in the sink. I have to take responsibility for it, unless I want the other people in the house to suffer from my own slovenly behavior. Maybe I do. Maybe that satisfies something inside of me, but I should take responsibility for that too. What is it? Why do I really like other people to smell my stink? What's going on with that? That's something I should look at if I'm going to gnothi se out and if I'm going to know myself, right? If you don't know yourself, you can't take responsibility for yourself. If you don't take responsibility for yourself, you'll never become an adult or even an individual. You end up just being a type. And the type is whatever's in your character right now, that's what you're going to be for the rest of your life. It will unfold new things from inside itself without any participation from you because you've decided to have a passive relationship to your character. Effectively, you've decided not to be an adult. To the ancient Greeks, this is what adulthood is. Adulthood is, yes, I acknowledge it's in there. Yes, I acknowledge it's growing and changing over time. However, I also acknowledge that I can alter its course, and I have a duty to find the bullshit parts of my character and alter them to make something better so that the impact I have on the world can be better, since my impact is driven by what's inside me. I know people who hate this stuff. I mean, they hate it a lot. They don't ever want to talk about what's inside people. They think that's gross. They want to talk about the forces of history and the means of production and the class struggle. They want to talk about, what is our strategy for winning the current battles and blah, blah, blah. And what's missing from all that is a recognition that, okay, so suppose you win the battle. What are you going to do next? You're going to inflict your character on everybody. The thing that you've spent all these years never taking responsibility for, whether it's alcoholism, whether it's bad anger management, whether it's child abuse, whatever the hell is in there that you haven't dealt with, if you're put into a position of power, all those bad things are just going to get magnified because that's what power does, is it allows you to inflict your character on people more successfully. So you really have a duty to not only be working to fix the world around you, yeah, people are homeless, see what you can do about that, but also to deal with the crap inside yourself so that when you act, you don't make things worse. Donald, come off mute, tell us what's on your mind.
When I saw Kenneth recently, strangely, he recited to me something that you recite, not every week, but probably no more than every third week. That is Oedipus. Oedipus and his character. And Kenneth made the observation that if Oedipus had done nothing, he would never have met his father and killed him, and never would have known his mother and married her. That there is also a dialectic in how one accepts or changes one's fate that contemplates. So it's just strange that you talk about this all the time, and Kenneth told the same story, but then he has this twist at the end that for Oedipus, a certain acceptance would have avoided his fate. Instead
Yeah,
of, so I guess the lesson is we can't just fight our fate,
right.
try and change it. Well, Oedipus happened to know his fate. We don't happen to know ours generally,
Yes.
you know. So
I,
I'm not sure, but it's another thing. These things that we've talked about are just weaving together here
they are.
incredibly thickly.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, and the point that Kenneth's making, it illuminates what happens if in dealing with your fate you focus strictly on shaping the contingency from the nature around you and you ignore shaping the agency from the nature within you. That's Oedipus's blunder is that he tries to control his fate strictly externally. He relocates himself. I will go somewhere else. It has nothing to do with, well, why would I kill my father and marry my mother? What is in me? What is my teleology? If that's my teleology, what is in my character that is generating this teleology? And how can I change that? And that's the thing Oedipus would not look at. He would only look at the external world and change the external world. And so Oedipus Tyrannus is teaching us that if you make the mistake of only looking at one half of the equation or the other, it's going to be a blunder. And I would not be surprised if there weren't Greek tragedies that are lost to us in which somebody makes the opposite mistake. All they do is work on their character and they never act in the world around them. And there are all these opportunities to fix things that are really easy to fix. I mean, really low hanging fruit. But no, no, it's all about my character. And it's only about my character. Because the Greeks would understand it's a dialectic between the nature around us and the nature within us. We have to act in both sides. And Oedipus blunders by only acting in one side. Yes. So the evil of saving exposed babies, says Stephen. I mean, there's so many lessons you can draw one way or another, depending on what your character is. Yes. Yes. So, all right. So let's keep going. For Joe and Ari's benefit, we are in the intro of the paper. We're in the third paragraph, paragraph 14, and we're in the second half of it. I'm gonna post it again so that you guys have access to it there. And I'm also going to repost the text of the first half of paragraph 14, which is what we talked about last week, and the second half of paragraph 14, which is what we're talking about this week. And we'll go on to paragraph 15 too in a little bit. So just to be helpful. So we did the first sentence of the second half. We did the second half sentence of the second half. Let's do is this the final sentence of the second half? No, one more thing to say about this, though, actually. I just checked my notes again. Strength. Strength. So Oedipus is the smartest of the Thebans. He's the bravest of the Thebans. Hell, he might even be the most compassionate of the Thebans. He wants to solve the riddle of the Sphinx. He wants to save the people of Thebes. He wants to lift the miasma. He wants to protect his father and his mother. He has all these good intentions. He has all these virtues, doesn't he? I mean, we've talked before about the way that tragedy works is it's not a tragedy if it's about some mediocre schmo who has a mediocre life. That's comedy to the Greeks. I mean, people who are worse than we are was the subject of comedy. People who are better than we are was the subject of tragedy. So the issue is that the Greeks have this nuanced understanding of strength that moderns do not have. We think the guy who can punch you in the face the hardest is the strongest guy. And the Greeks knew that wasn't the case. Being able to punch other people in the face is a part of strength. They love that part, but it's only a part of strength. And there are other parts of strength, like knowing when not to punch somebody in the face. Being able to restrain yourself from punching somebody in the face when this is really the wrong time to do it, but you really want to. The Greeks understood the difference between somebody like, Ajax and somebody like Achilles. The warrior could be just a big grunt, a big, the Greeks did not believe that Ajax was the superior warrior. They knew Achilles was. Achilles had more control and more finesse. He wasn't physically the strongest man on the field, but he was stronger because of his other gifts. And Odysseus, who's definitely not the greatest fighter, but he was very strong. They would not have won the war without him. Without Odysseus, they were too weak to win the war. The man had strength, but it wasn't this strength. And the Greeks had no problem with this idea that a concept like strength can be nuanced and it can involve multiple dimensions. And which dimension is relevant is a shifting thing depending on, the dialectic between agency and contingency and kairos and all that stuff. I mean, they got that, but we don't get that. We think the guy with the most bombs wins. We can't figure out how the US just lost a war against Iran. which is a fraction of our size, has a fraction of our military. Hell, we have nukes, and yet we lost. It was clearly a defeat. However, it's painted, it was obviously a defeat. And we can't figure that out because for us, the numbers never lie. We have the most money, the most guns, the most population, we're the bigliest, so we win. And the Greeks understood that that makes us not an Achilles or an Odysseus, it makes us an Ajax. And we think Hulk smash is the sum total of strength. And so the truth is, this is why modern movements in politics keep falling for things like fascism and communism, totalitarianism, is this idea that strength is literal strength, that productive capacity in the case of communism, how many, sweaters am I turning out? How many tractors am I turning out? These numbers are the most important thing. Just like we think, well, we have the most bombs, we have the most fighter planes, we have the most, we're doing the same thing. And this is the sort of flatland thinking that makes people join fascism or any of these extremist movements. They're all based on the idea that strength is a simple thing that you can obviously see and obviously count, and whoever has that thing is the winner. And when you have a literal minded idea of strength, your idea of governance is to be the tyrant. Strength is I'm in charge and everybody does what I say because I'm stronger than they are. So shut up. And I was literally just hearing Hannah Arendt talk about this last week and between past and future. Says this is what's so stupid about people who keep popping up tyrants is they don't understand what the Greeks clearly understood. Aristotle talks about it clearly, which is that the strength of the tyrant is his weakness. He bullies everybody in his own culture and society. And so he becomes the major source of their problems. He unites all the factions against him because he's kicking around all of them. People who hate each other can eventually notice, most of the problems in my life don't come from you. They come from this asshole in charge. And the other side says, I really hate you guys, but it's true. All my problems come from that dick. They're like, how about we kill each other later? And right now we go hang that dick. This is what happens to tyrannies, Aristotle says. For all that it's Hulk smash, I'm the strongest. It's the weakest form of government because it's the one that destroys itself every single goddamn time. They always destroy themselves. And how much weaker do you have to get than that? How can you possibly be weaker? Yeah, okay, I can defeat all kinds of enemies, but I collapse without any input from the outside. I'm a house of cards. And worse than a house of cards, I'm a house of mousetraps. The first one gets set off, and now the whole thing is snapping and flying through the air. I don't know if you guys have ever seen those videos where they fill an entire room full of mousetraps, and on each one is a ping pong ball. And then somebody chucks a ping pong ball into the middle of the room. If you've never seen those videos, you should Google it. It is hilarious. Just the wave of ping pong balls erupting from the floor. But this is what happens with a tyranny. It kills itself. So Hannah Arendt says the same thing Aristotle says. Nothing's weaker. It's as weak as the pursuit of direct, obvious, literal strength results in weakness, just like the pursuit of direct, obvious, literal happiness results in unhappiness. These are the paradoxes of life. Happiness emerges from more complicated things than shooting up with heroin. And strength emerges from more complicated things than how many people can I punch in the face? How much can I bench press? These are trivial concerns compared to genuine strength. In the karate dojo I grew up in my youth, I over half my life by age 13, I'd been in a karate dojo, and they had a big poster on the wall. And it was somebody with a whole bunch of muscles petting a kitten. And it said, um, only true strength can be gentle, and only true gentleness can be strong. And it's capturing this idea that if you have enormous muscles but you don't control them, then you're like Frankenstein's monster. I've just been watching the old black and white Frankenstein movies from the 30s, by the way. They're really good, especially the first two. But he's too strong. He has no control. He can smash things, but he includes smashing things he doesn't want to smash. He ruins the things that he loves. He's like Midas. Okay, how much money? All the money. Everything is money. Even your daughter's money. You don't have anything anymore. Everything's turned to gold. And you wanted more than gold. In fact, it turned out you just thought you only wanted gold. This is how it is with being with brute strength. These tyranny, fascism, totalitarianism, Stalinist communism, you name it. And and I'll call on Sharon in just a second. This is one of the points that he's making here, is that to be a grown up is to recognize the law of unintended consequences, that life isn't as simple as we want it to be, that when we reach directly for something, we often break that thing, and that we have to learn to control ourselves and understand ourselves in the world well enough that we can be full of muscles and yet still pet a kitten. And if we can't do that, we actually aren't strong at all. We're just an oaf. A boulder that rolls downhill and smashes your house isn't something admirable to try to be like. It's a problem that needs to be solved. And if you try to mimic that boulder by being the strongest thing ever and having no other virtues, all you've done is make yourself the problem that everybody has to solve. And this is what happens to tyranny. Sharon, tell us what's on your mind.
So I just had a quick question following up on something you just said, because I believe that only the weak are cruel most times. And so I want your comment on that. I really believe that.
Well, certainly
Strong people tend to be kinder than white people, because strong people have the courage to do introspection and take responsibility for their behavior.
And think about the downstream consequences, right?
That's right.
The cruel person isn't thinking about where this is all leading. They're just lashing out. They have an anger management problem.
Correct.
How dare you, says the cruel person. I will show you. I will punish you. But that's weakness. They have a weak character. They have the character of a toddler who's having a tantrum, right? It doesn't matter how many muscles you have if you're throwing a tantrum. It's the genuinely strong person can look ahead and think about the consequences of things. And it's like Joe's quoting from Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, and boy, isn't that a piece of work. Sweet mercy is nobility's true badge. The need to prove to everybody that you're in charge is the demonstration that you don't actually feel like you're in charge. You're so unsure that you need everything around you to tell you that you're in charge. You need everyone to flatter you. And that just means you're not in charge. You're not in control of yourself, let alone anybody else. The people who are in charge don't need that kind of feedback. They can look around and see for themselves that they're in charge. And they can focus their energy on more constructive things like, how do we go somewhere better than where we are now? And going somewhere better than where we are now has more to do is involves a lot more than just I shall crush my enemies and drive them before me and listen to the lamentations of the women, says Conan. It's like, no, that's weakness. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Oh, well, I'm just going to say, Roman Empire had the vote. People elected officials from 509 BC. Originally, of course, the lower classes didn't have the vote, but they acquired the vote after a century or so, and it had so many centuries of glorious voting. Whether you could call it a democracy, it was a republic, but officials were elected. Much of the Greco world at the time was, we would call, enlightened. This was the Greek Enlightenment. And then we got the tyrant, Augustus Caesar, and we had centuries of successful tyranny. One of the history's great successful tyrannies. So, was there a character in time? You're talking about character. Now, this is Oswald Spengler's whole drift, that the Greco culture lasted, a couple of thousand years. And we don't see it in its really early days. Its really early days, we would think Patui. It's really early days had the example of Achilles. And we think Patui, what an idiot. And he was. This was Greece in its infancy. And then, they create the Olympics, and you're starting to see the flowering of Greek culture. And then the whole period from roughly about 500 BC onwards, it bears its fruit to the world. But then the tree wilts, and you get the sort of the phase of old age. It's gone from maturity to old age, and the symbol of that is Augustus. So, but he said he came to a city of stone and left the city of marble. So how do you deal with centuries of successful tyranny? Tell me,
It's a
Rick.
great question, Stephen. And I'm gonna turn us to Aristotle and say that Aristotle would say that just because one person's in charge doesn't mean it's a tyranny. It could be a monarchy. He distinguishes between monarchy and tyranny. And he in both cases there's one person in charge. But what differs between them is that the monarch is an Aristos and the tyrant is not an Aristos. And so as we look at each of these emperors one by one, we have to size up where do they fall on, the spectrum between being a monarch versus a tyrant. And Augustus, for example, he did not rule like a tyrant. He ruled like a monarch. And you could see it in all kinds of ways. But symbolically, you can see it in his brand when he insisted that he said, I'm not better than you, I'm just the first among equals. And his entire period as emperor was, it was like fan fiction to the Roman Republic. He called himself the restorer of the Roman Republic after the period of the tyrants of the battles. And there's an interesting book out there that's arguing that he was not, in fact, the first of the emperors by intention. He may have been in truth, but by intention, he was the last of the Republicans. And he was everything he did in his life was trying to turn Rome into an homage to the great Republican virtues. Now, after that, as you know, it's hit or miss, one emperor to the next. You've got your people who are more builders and organizers on the one hand, who are sort of trying to behave in a monarchic fashion. But then you've got your Caligulas after he goes nuts. Where it's definitely he's overtly trying to be a tyrant. And what tends to happen is the more the emperor tries to behave overtly like a tyrant, the more he ends up being assassinated by his own guards. So it actually bears out Aristotle's point. The most successful emperors that follow are the ones who are trying to actually administer the empire like a monarch would. And the ones who are most in it to indulge themselves and make all their enemies feel terrified are the ones that everybody hates, and sometimes they kill them.
Well, you've got a tyrant or a monarch at the moment.
Yeah.
Emperor Donald.
Emperor Donald, good old Emperor Donald.
Well, this is the thing that what's occurring, let's say, in America, and America is a leader of the Western world, and America has gone on the centrifugal path.
Yes,
It's spinning out of control.
we certainly are.
It's because it's matured all these tiny little small groups that think that their picture of things to come is the one and true picture, and all the others are wrong. Each little group has decided that America must dance to its tune. Remember the ancient fable, was it? Greek fable, wasn't it? About the man, the miller, and the donkey, and they come
Oh
past the
yes,
crowd.
Yes, yes,
And the crowd in each case is saying, do it this way, do it that way.
right.
And I think one of the amazing things, the perversity of human nature is they just want to make their point. They don't really care about the quality of what they suggest. They just have to suggest something.
Yes. Yes. We see this on Facebook all the time on the threads. Someone will come in and say their piece, and someone will say, actually, that's been disproven. And the guy said, hey, I don't care if it's proven or disproven. I just needed to say my piece. It's just exactly what you're saying. It's like my need to emit is so great that I've lost track of why anybody's communicating to begin with. Am I actually trying to
So
agree with
one
them?
Jordan Peterson does with Dostoevsky when he brings up the underground man, and the underground man's complaining that that's part of human nature, that even if everything's fine and good, he's got to prove his point, even if he wrecks everything.
Yes, but at least I won. Right. Yeah, we have lots of problems for sure. And he's this paper is going to talk about them from this existentialist perspective. These are interesting points.
So was the Roman Empire a tyranny or a monarchy?
Well, it went back and forth, didn't it? And
Okay.
when the emperors behaved more like monarchs, they tended to be more stable. And when they behaved more like tyrants, they tended to be overthrown and assassinated. And
Of course,
it's for the usual reason. I mean, if you piss off everybody around you, you're motivating them to kill you. So sooner or later, one of them will get you.
when the Romans left Britain and the Romano Britons suddenly had to look to their own defences,
Yes.
they get the personality that they describe as Vortigern, the overbearing tyrant, as he's described in the annals, that because everything was falling apart, the tyrant had to appear to unite them all,
Yeah.
even if he was bad.
Yes.
A bad unity in certain circumstances is better than disunity.
Certainly people feel that way. Yeah, it's frequently it's the case we act on incomplete information. We don't actually know which of the choices would be the right choice. And we act based on our character and our culture, which is the point that he's making. The world seems to make sense a certain way to us because of our character and culture. And in that feeling of something had to be done and this had to be the choice, all of that is just our character speaking. Because the character is the one that the unconscious part of us is the part that believes we have a good grasp on reality, and that if we don't see an alternative, then there is no alternative. This is it. This is our only choice. And it's all this what you're talking about, the squabbling among the factions who can't agree on anything in the United States. This is all of this comes from an inability to recognize that each of us is looking from a biased perspective, and that the truth is not something that any of us has individually. We're gonna have to figure it out together. This essay I named a moment ago, The Concept of History, Ancient and Modern, in Between Past and Future by Hannah Arendt. She talks about this. She talks about how, when Athens was working well, it was because all the people, all these willful Aristoi were comparing notes. They were all talking about their different perspectives and trying to think about, well, what do you see that I'm missing? And that's the thing that we don't do in the United States anymore. We all say, what's the thing that I have that you are missing? You should all listen to me. And it's the wannabe tyrant or monarch in us all that's causing us all to just say, okay, you disagree, let's fight. But anyway, let's go back to the text because I mean, obviously the modern.
I'll make one more point, and because I have to have my point anyway. Nietzsche's point about envy, and there was nothing new in Nietzsche's point about envy. He was simply repeating what was back there in ancient Greece. It's the nature of envy, that everybody is envious. It's something Nietzsche's trying to point out. Your lives are filled with envy. This is the normal aspect of, because modern thought only sees envy as a bad thing. Aristotle said there was a good form of envy and a bad form of envy. So you're all envious. It's part of your nature. We automatically, we are these Christians or whatever. We say envy is evil, but it's something so strong in human nature, and it's a question of dealing with something. This is being forgotten by modern culture. Albert Ellis, of course, in his system, picked up on this one. I'll leave you with that one.
That's a good point. And for anybody who's interested in what Stephen's talking about, Nietzsche's essay Homer's Contest is one that Kenneth often recommends. And it's where Nietzsche talks about how different the ancients were from us. Their lust for conflict and which got turned into competition through the Olympic Games. But also this is the essay where Nietzsche talks flat out about envy. The Greeks thought envy was an incredibly useful thing. We in the moderns we read about all these different gods and goddesses, the minor ones like Enyo, the goddess of envy. We think, oh, Enyo must be an evil goddess, right? Because that's the Christian medieval training in us, teaching envy's a bad thing, so Enya must be a bad goddess. But the Greeks didn't think so. The Greeks thought actually that envy frequently was a good thing because it led people to get off their butts and make an effort in the world. Oh, that guy has he painted his house and it looks nice. My house sucks. And I envy his paint job and it makes me get off my butt and paint my house. And the Greeks recognized that envy could be an enormous spur. Another place where you'll see this going in line with what Stephen's saying, Japanese culture. They have a tradition of rivals. Rivals. When you're in school or in college, you pick somebody to be your rival, and you try to beat them, not by sabotaging them, but by rising to their level or above. You're trying to egg each other on to excellence by having a rival. And Americans read these Japanese stories. We don't always understand. Oh, the rival, you must hate each other. It's like, no, no, we envy each other. We don't hate each other at all. We totally envy each other, and we're gonna compete with each other and see if we can both end up in a better place. Maybe we could both get A's, and one of us might win and be the top grade, and the other one has to be under them. But it could be that without the rivalry, we would have both got C's. But instead, we egged each other on. And
The anarchist peasants in Monty Python, The Holy Grail.
Yes.
They didn't have much in the way of envy for King Arthur. They despised him.
They despised him.
But they must have had envy amongst each other over
Yes.
who had the biggest piles.
Whose clod of mud was the best clod of mud? My clod's better than your clod. Anyway, thank you, Stephen. So let's wrap up paragraph 14 so we can move on to 15. The last sentence of this paragraph. Moderns who illustrate this fatalism and self-desolation more perfectly than any other era are also, by the logic of that fatalism, less willing to confront those ultimate philosophical truths to see what their order means. And so this is the point that he's making here is one of responsibility, the recognition of what we are responsible for, whether we like it or not. Whether we are willing to behave responsibly or not is a whole other question, but we're responsible for it anyway. I mean, who the hell else made this society? I mean, pigeons? Who are we going to blame? Waterfalls? We made it. This is a people thing. If there's things in it we don't like, that's our job to deal with it. But going back to what Stephen said, most moderns relate to their societies passively. Even when we don't like it, even when we're whining about it, even when we're demonstrating about it, we still relate passively. I mean, which country was it? Was it Hungary or Romania where they just shut down an effort to the US wanted to purchase an island and set up a big thing, and the whole country basically got out and demonstrated and shut the government down, shut the country down, and it was
Albania.
Thank you, Albania. So this is a country. Albania is for all of its problems. Albania is a country in which the citizens understand that they make that country, they make that government, and they make those decisions. And if the government's doing something they don't want, they just shut the country down. until the government admits that it's not actually in charge and the people are. And then Albania changes its policies. In the United States, people can be enraged about what Emperor Donald does, and still they go out for one day, demonstrate, and then go home and go back to their lives. And Emperor Donald is perfectly happy to have people once every 6 months come out and have a demonstration and then go away, because the rest of the 6 months he can do whatever he wants. Right? I mean, this isn't actually shutting the country down. This is nothing like the civil rights movement of the 60s. In the United States, our relationship to our government is passive. We think we suffer it. It's our daddy. And if we let our daddy know that we're unhappy, then surely daddy will want to make things better for us. Just from the goodness of his nature, he'll want that. Right? All we have to do is make our desires known. The civil rights movement in the 60s knew that wasn't true. I mean, the Southern Leadership Conference that worked with Martin Luther King and others on those demonstrations, they didn't just go out and say, hey, we're unhappy. I mean, the Selma bus strike shut down the city. They shut down the bus system. Nobody, they were losing money hand over fist until they complied and broke up the segregation. I mean, the goal was to make the society in a nonviolent fashion ungovernable until the demands were met and change was instituted. That is what Albania did this year. And that's what in the United States we mostly fail to do.
Well,
Go ahead, Sharon.
that's why Minnesota was so impressive to me.
Yes. That was an exception. In Minnesota, they actually did things more like the civil rights movement. It wasn't just people put, like in Portland, people put on frog costumes and danced around the ice people and self-expressed their mockery, and that's all well and good. But Minnesota actually shut down the invasion because they behaved as though it's their country, it's their society, it's their government, and they're going to shape it. Uh, but when people don't feel that way, when they don't take responsibility for their culture and their society, then they slip into the kinds of things Stephen's talking about, where it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to be satisfied by emitting my opinion, and you all have to listen to it. And that is the sum total of my politics, such as they are. Once every 4 years, I'll go out and pull a lever, and in between, I'll carp and whine and not actually change anything. It's a problem. And it comes from a confusion about the relationship between character and culture. We think the society is this, and this is a typically modern failure to understand. Man is at the top. Below him is nature, and below that is God. So when a society does a thing, it's almost the equivalent of what it was in the Middle Ages when something was appointed by God. Or when in the ancient period, people said, well, katafusin, that's according to nature. We say, well, I'm sorry, the law said this and it's awful, but I guess we have to go along with it. And if it sounds like I'm oversimplifying, of course I am, but I'm going through the Hannah Arendt stuff where she's critiquing both, what happened in Nazi Germany and what happened in the Stalinist Soviet Union. And so much of it is about capitulation and the belief that, well, a law's a law and a rule's a rule, and I wouldn't want to get in trouble. I've talked before about how this notion results in a people whose highest value is to not be the nail that sticks up. And they think that that's virtuous. I was never the troublemaker. I didn't cause any problems. And therefore, don't hurt me. This is a kind of level of domestication that Homo sapiens has never seen really before the modern era. It's astonishing. And as Arendt points out, without that, the Holocaust never could have happened. Without that, the Stalinist gulags never could have happened. It was all the people who thought, well, I have to go along with things because that's what you do. It's like the cattle going up the ramp to have the bullet, the gun in the head. So, well, this is what we're doing now, and I know it's awful and I'm going to die, but who am I to question? I wouldn't want to get in trouble. All of this comes from overestimating the objective reality and authority of the things that we ourselves have spun out of ourselves. There is no objective, completely independent objective reality to our society or our economy or our politics. We made this. and we can make it differently. But to do that, we have to take responsibility both for what's out there and for what's in here, because what's in here is spinning out what's out there. All right. So this is what he's talking about in paragraph 14. Shall we go on? Let's go on to paragraph 15. I think we can wrap up this week the introduction. So let's see. Let me see how much room we've got to paste in here. Paragraph 15. A little too long. All right. Well, I'll cut it in half then. There we go. Right there. That's the first half. That's the second half. This is where he ends. He ends the intro with a discussion of human nature, which is the perfect setup for the rest of the paper. How can notoriously impersonal and dehumanizing modern civilization be the child of forces of human personality? It sounds crazy. There's nothing more human than your own personality. And there's nothing less human than these great satanic mills, dark satanic mills, I think, as as who am I saying? As a man is, so he sees. William Blake famously described the industrialization of England as the destruction of the meadows and the forests and the glades, and the replacement with dark satanic mills, in which people's lives are ground up for profit. And pollution, which Victorian England had a lot of coal smoke. So, you know, few things seem less human than these dystopian industries of the elimination of human beings. The trains in Germany always running to the death camps. The computers, the IBM computers that assigned a number to each person, and they stamped the number on the people and treated the people like a number. All of that stuff seems completely inhuman. It seems impossible that it could emerge from human personality. We figure like it must have been some mistake, or it must have a force of its own. Maybe it came from the devil. And he's saying, no, it comes from the most human part of us. It comes from our inner character. And the thing that's happening is that the Banausic character loves mechanisms. It loves them. Yeah, Stephen says the dark satanic mills of 1840 were works of art compared to the windowless flat slabs of today. You're not wrong. I've been playing City Skylines, which is the replacement for Sim City. It's a video game. I play about once a month, and I'm trying to make a city that doesn't suck. And they have little packages. You can buy little packages to change the look of your industry or your commerce or your residential buildings. And one of the ones they had was Victorian factories. They all your factories don't have to look modern; they can look Victorian. And oh my God, they look so much better than the big flat windowless slabs that we've replaced them with. Excellent point, Stephen. So the thing is, this stuff seems inhuman, and of course, there are things about it that we hate, that seem hellish to us. And so it's natural for us to want to push it away. We're not responsible for that. I don't know where that came from. It's just some horrible thing. The last thing in the world we want to say is, yeah, that came from me. That came from us. We projected that outwards. Human beings did that. It's a very human thing to make these inhumane systems. But it's not a universally human thing to do it. The point that he's not saying it outright, but the reason this is in the intro before we get into the main paper is he's trying to emphasize how different these three human character types are. This inhumane thing comes from the subjectivity of the Banausos. Duloi wouldn't make a world like this. It'd be more like the Eloi from from the Time Machine. Stephen talks about from time to time. Let's have sex, let's get drunk, let's eat food, it'd be very comfort and fear and oriented, the direct immediate needs. But it'd be simpler and more disorganized. People would squabble over stupid things and have difficulty planning for the future. But it would be more human and humane. And an eristic culture, well, we can only guess, because that's not going to happen in the modern world. But it wouldn't be like this, because an Aristos will take responsibility for the bad, inhuman things that we create and say, this must be changed. And we'll take responsibility for the bad, inhuman things in us, in our subjectivity, that we have spun out to generate these inhumane things, and say, how are we going to change the way that we grow up? How are we going to change the stories we tell each other? How are we going to change our religion so that the next generation of people don't have these same broken things in them that lead us to do these inhumane things to one another? Where in us has this thing outside of us come from? And how do we take responsibility for it? So this is what we're seeing is Banausic, right? The idea that law and order is the opposite of chaos, which isn't true. From the Greek perspective, law and order is a form of chaos. They're both chaos. The thing that's not chaos is autarkia, autonomia, is cohering as an organism. That's the thing that both law and order and what we take to be chaos are both failing to do. They're both arbitrary and non-organic. All right, his next sentence. Modern see only an invasion of naive psyche or community by alien schemes of abstract control, of profit and quantification. So we sort of see this, Morlocks and Aloy. We imagine that it's some alien species has done this to us, or some evil science, some bad math has done this to us. Some mistake was made somewhere, and no person would intentionally do any of this. Or maybe somebody is in league with the devil and he does this because he's evil. And man, Hannah Arendt has a lot of interesting things to say about the nature of evil. But it's why everyone hated it when she summed up Eichmann's life and death in terms of the banality of evil. She's saying that mindlessness, that thoughtlessness, that appeal to cliches, that look for routines, doing things the same way every time, measuring things just to make sure they always come out the same. The quantification over qualification. This is banal. This is the Banausic personality writ large. The Holocaust is the Banausic personality writ large. And as long as we try to understand it at a dualic level, as long as we say, wow, they must really have hated those Jews, we're not gonna be able to, never again is going to be a joke. We're just going to do it over and over until the end of time. So one of the things Hannah Arendt says, it's so hard to understand and take, is that at the same time that the Nazis were whining about the protocols of the Elders of Zion and the Jews and the great Jewish conspiracy, they envied it. They overtly modeled the Nazi organizational structure on what they imagined the protocols of the Elders of Zion were about. They wanted to be the new Jews. They wanted a secret society, but not of Jews, but of Germans. That they would be the secret society, and they would rule the whole world and have all the money and have all the influence. And every single thing that they complained about the Jews doing, from the forged, completely bullshit protocols of the Elders of Zion, were things they actually set into policy themselves as Nazis to do. This isn't hatred, this is envy. They envied the fantasy they had of the Jews. They wanted to become those people. They wanted to have all that stuff. They wanted all that power that the Jews didn't have, but that the fantasy version of Jews that they were hallucinating had. And so in order to do that, what we're seeing projected out is their vision of what the world looks like if you do those things. And as Arendt says, there's nothing profound about the evil of the Holocaust. It is a vast evil. It's on an epic scale, but it's so shallow. She says it's extensive rather than radical because it has no real roots. It doesn't really believe in anything. It's just a horrible surface phenomenon being carried out over and over and over. And in this, no matter how inhumane it seems, what we're seeing is human character. It's not alien schemes of abstract control. It's what happens when you let Banausoi have a say in how the world will be run. It seems to the Banausoi, if you give them some say, that it would be better if they had all the say. Because after all, look at all the manifest flaws of the douloi. And the Aristoi do pretty good, but they don't follow through the way that they should. They're not consistent enough. So really, the Banausoi have to seize power from the douloi and the Aristoi and make things right. And by right, we mean banausic, i.e. banal, i.e. inhumane, i.e. a dystopia, i.e. hell on earth. And then things will be right, because all of the numbers will add up in the spreadsheets. Kenneth continues, how can the root of our rootless inhuman order still be man instead of vacuous a priori intellectualizing ex nihilo? This present argument looks to the chemistry and metabolism of human nature in concreto. In other words, Kenneth is saying he's going to explain what's gone wrong, not in terms of weird theories and systems of philosophy and politics, but by looking at what is human nature. What kinds of people are there? Who thinks like this? Who is this natural to? Who would want to make the world like this, and why would they want to do it? He says, finishing up the first half, and I'll call on Joe then. What specific kinds of creatures are we obscurely determined to be? And how are we thus inwardly bound to live and think and see? So obscurely, right? Because character is unconscious. It's in us. And determined because our teleology arises from within our character. Our character doesn't determine our fate, but it determines the direction of our fate. We keep pushing in that direction, trying in that direction, whether we admit it or not, whether we know it or not. There's something juicy and human and wanting in us that's striving to express itself, to take that hidden subjective part of us that is so forceful, like a fountain within us. It wants to burst forth. And so we change the laws, and we change the literature, and we change the art, and we change the economy to match what feels right to us from inside. And thus we create, what we are determined to create by our character, without ever recognizing how little our conscious mind had to do with it. We think we chose all this stuff, but we didn't choose our character. Hardly anybody in the modern world ever takes responsibility for their character. Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, just really quickly to your point, there's an element of acceptance that has to, that comes with, I would say some degree of tranquility in the need. There's an element of control there, or the lack thereof, that you have and you accept with that. Right? The world is the way it is. That doesn't mean you have a passive relationship with the world, or you don't necessarily engage in trying to change things or live without meaning, but when you start dictating to the world that the way it has to be, then that's where it starts to be, well, what do I need in order to control it? And so that's where we start to get into procedures. What is the process, and how does the process need to work? And then you start to get into ideas of like where you have a routine, and you look at the idea that of something that is unique as being a flaw. And something that is that's outside of the system, the person that has a unique perspective that is deviating from the procedure as being flawed. And so that needs to be kind of eradicated. And that's essentially what, you could say that the Nazis were doing. And then something you mentioned as well as what Kenneth had written is that, the idea of an abstraction, or reducing people to literally numbers in camps. That's what they did, right? You got tattooed on your wrist. You got tattooed a number on your wrist. You were a case. So the idea of Stalin really kind of comes up here as well, is that, one person's a tragedy, 20 million's a statistic, right? So that you start to no longer see the world through the idea of a human being or the uniqueness of human beings, you start to see it as, kind of this abstraction where everything's a process. When you look at everything as a process, well, then how many people were dislocated or had to be relocated? You don't think about the human stories that exist. It's or as far as anytime a tragedy comes up, you just reduce it to, well, was it really? What's the percentage? Not the tragedy that actually occurred. So in that process, you lose your humanity. And that's what essentially Hannah Arendt was getting at with Eichmann, is that he was doing the routine. He was just going about the procedural process. And so when you look at it through that lens, you can start to see how dehumanization kind of becomes the norm. But it all results from not accepting the world the way it is and having to control it. And that's where a totalitarian mindset actually comes from. They need to control everything. So as opposed to saying, okay, this is nature, it's not ideal, but let's work with it, not control it. Anyway, I think that's a really important sentence that when it came down to the idea of looking at profit or quantification as a way of, or an abstract control specifically. This whole idea of control is a really important, deep concept to dig down on.
I agree. Yeah, he's in this last paragraph of the intro, part of what he's trying to do is say, why would I even write a paper like this? Why would I even focus on these issues? And he's saying, because the things that we want, whether we want positively or negatively, they drive us. They drive us. And they need to be questioned. If we want to produce different results, we got to be able to question our desires. Whether they're emotional desires or intellectual desires doesn't matter. We can be screwed up both ways. Dulick screw ups or Banausic screw ups. But what you're talking about with the abstractions is more on the Banausic side, which is the larger problem for us in the modern world. I mean, granted, Banausoi couldn't run the world if it weren't for all the douloi who allow themselves to be manipulated by Banausoi. So there's vastly more douloi than Banausoi in the modern world. And they're stampeded this way and then that way and then the other way. As Kenneth says, people who do not cultivate themselves turn themselves into a particular kind of raw material, which he calls a useful idiot. And a useful idiot is someone who's so focused on, he doesn't mean idiot like dummy. He means like they're focused on their own things, my interests, my political party, my religion, my language. And these people genericize themselves because they're so focused on these generic qualities that define them, that are their own, that it makes it really easy for some con artist to manipulate them. Con artists that have to learn, if you had a whole world full of 8 billion completely individualized people, con artists couldn't get very far. I mean, it'd take a long time to figure out each of those people. But the more people make themselves generic, the more a con artist gets leverage. Because now instead of fooling one person, they can fool 80 million people. Because 80 million people have made themselves very much like one another. The same angers, the same reflexes, the same desires. They've made themselves more of a type than an individual. And the consequence of that is that it's like leaving loaded guns lying around on the street, right? It's not that no gun should exist anywhere, but God, they shouldn't be lying all over the damn place, because the worst people are going to pick them up and use them on the street because they're so easy to get a hold of. It's like big barrels of gunpowder on every corner downtown. That's just a disaster waiting to happen. And he says that's what it's like when you leave giant pools of useful idiots lying around your society. Somebody, that is an enormous amount of power,
Right.
potential energy that can be converted into kinetic energy. And con artists know about potential and kinetic energy. They are going to pick up that resource and wield it. Because, I mean, if they don't, some other con artist will. And they want to beat the other con artist. So they want to be the first one to do it. So they grab them and they wield them. And this kind of a structure, I mean, all of this comes from the modern cluelessness about human character that causes us to not cultivate this side of people. Right? We always, in the United States, we always have these educational reforms in which we scream over and over and over about the three R's. Oh, we don't have time for all that art and humanities crap. It's reading, writing, and arithmetic. And what we mean is, I need people to be appliances. I need appliances for my business, and I need a lot of them. And every second that you devote to anything that isn't making somebody a utensil is, I feel like money coming out of my pocket. So I'm going to drive out all of the humanities education. No education about religion, no education about philosophy, no morality, no history, no art, nothing that would allow the person to be anything but a useful idiot. Right? To be a doulos doesn't mean that you're a fixed thing. Because doulic character is still character. It's an organism and it's going to grow and change. There's a wide range of possible expressions of the doulic character type. And Athens would have argued that they were trying to cultivate their douloi to be as sophisticated and wise as it's possible for a doulos to be. Whereas in our culture, we work to decultivate people to be as low as possible so that they are an excellent audience for our marketing, for our political ads, our public relations from our corporations. We want people to consume and produce and to receive the memes that we imprint upon them. And if they're individualized people of their own, then that becomes an obstacle to them being a passive recipient of the things that I want to program them to do. And so the modern world really strips down the humanizing quality of these douloi and makes them more of a problem than they've ever been in any human civilization before. These are banalsified douloi.
How much of a problem is this, though, in terms of, and I agree with you 100%. If you ask somebody, why'd you go to school? It's to get a job,
To
right?
get a job.
It's to fit into the process.
I have to pay my bills.
Exactly. And which is not unreasonable, but I mean, it's the way the system's actually then set up. But how much of a problem is this of scale?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole like the idea that we're like, okay, well, we need to have I don't know, we need to produce goods and services at such a high level. But even then, it doesn't really, nobody asks themselves in the process, what does it really mean to live a good life and all these other important questions, right? It's just all about production of goods and services.
Right.
So, I mean, because I think about scalability quite a bit. And so what does Kenneth really say? Does he speak to that in particular?
Not in this paragraph.
No, definitely, yeah.
He's going to address this stuff, but certainly he acknowledges that having one useful idiot is like having a firecracker. Maybe you could startle somebody with him. But having billions of useful idiots is like having an arsenal of nuclear bombs. And bad actors become a much bigger threat when they're holding that much more power. That the irony is that it is easier to produce clean air, clean water, and clean food now than it has ever been before. I mean, we have the science and we have the industry to do it. We know how to pull it off. And we know that there are vast stretches of the Earth's surface in which it would do no harm whatsoever to set up farms. I mean, if you watch the David Attenborough stuff, you see most of the ocean is empty. It's a place that things pass through on their way to something interesting. There's vast stretches of open ocean that are just basically desert. And that space is bigger than all of the continental landmass put together. We could build floating farms all over this damn planet. We know how to do it. We could feed everybody if we wanted to. So the scale issue, we pretend that the number of people justifies stripping down the teaching of humanities and civics and other things about how to be a
Right.
decent being,
Right.
but it doesn't. It's a lie. It's a fake out. We don't do it for that reason. We do it because we want vast numbers of idiots. Then they're just more useful to us that way. And of course, the consequence is all these idiots in all of their jobs not only are being stampeded this way and then that way by whatever the latest political fad is, but also they do their jobs badly, right? If you're an idiot, you lack the cosmopolitan perspective that would allow you to tell when, if you follow the rules, you're going to break things. You got to know, learn the thing about thinking outside the box that anybody who does this knows, you got to know how to think inside the box first. Because if you don't know which problems can be solved by thinking inside the box, then you're going to be racing outside the box, left, right, and center when there are much simpler solutions at hand.
Right.
Thinking outside the box is the thing that you do as an escape valve to deal with problems that result from thinking inside the box. But when there's not a problem thinking inside the box, you should think inside the box. How do we build houses? Well, we teach that to people. And we teach it to people because when we built it the wrong way, they tended to fall down. Breaking the rules and being all edgy, look at me, I'm thinking outside the box, means mostly you're making houses that fall down. First, you got to learn how to build houses the normal way. So this is the problem is you get people who we train them to be able to think inside the box as the bare minimum requirement to being useful in the economy. But we never teach them how to judge in a mature adult way. When is it time to think inside the box and when is it time to think outside the box? When when is a problem solvable, except that nobody should be solving this problem because it's actually an inhumane thing to do? It's like in
Right.
Vietnam. When do you follow your sergeant's orders and when do you put a bullet in his head? There's times when you got to pull a bullet in his head because he's telling you to light this village on fire, and our national interest does not require torching all of these peasants. It doesn't have to happen. This guy's just a fucking lunatic. For those who don't know what I'm alluding, I mean, I worked in the VA for decades now. The highest incidence of fragging in the history of the United States was in the Vietnam War. And it was because we got really good at training up lieutenants in theory at places like West Point. And then we'd send them out and put them in charge of these squads that had a whole bunch of actual experience. And the squads knew more about right and wrong and what was going to work and what was not going to work than the lieutenants. But the lieutenants had this, they had the rank. So they would command people to do idiotic things. And many squads only exist because they killed their lieutenants. There's a lot of dead lieutenants in the Vietnam War. And a certain percentage of them they pretended were killed by the Viet Cong, but really.
I really appreciate you sharing that, how we're essentially when something is a lie and identifying when something is a lie and the importance of being able to ask a question, but also the importance of understanding, the processes
Yeah.
in order to ask a meaningful question. But I think that there's this other element that you really hit on again, coming back to the control component, is that, when you obviously train people in the same way, and only to be useful idiots, then there's that element of control that comes into that, right? You're controlling the way the populace was going to behave. So yeah, I mean, then that even removing the ability to even ask a question in that process is really what, and that's the idea. We're looking at the bare minimum as being the norm, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And in even asking the question could be punished. So it's interesting. No, I thought you brought up some very, very interesting points. I appreciate the scalability answer.
I mean,
Because
your question deserves a lot more answer, but it's going to take a long time to.
no, I mean, I think that was perfect. I mean, it's a lack of imagination, essentially, is what we're saying, is that sometimes, we can't even imagine things being different than they are because we'll rationalize saying things have to be this way because of scalability issues, but we never really think about like, well, we have answers, but we're just not using them.
Right.
And why are those answers not necessarily getting implemented? And I went to a whole conference at Princeton based off of, new technologies, and everything talked about how it could fit into the system. And I understood that. I get it, right? You have to have a valuation that, it's going to be able to, people are going to have to buy into your product, and it has to it has to provide some service. But it wasn't really an innovation at that point.
Yeah.
It was just becoming, it was something that was really more efficient. So the idea of coming up with something new was completely lost on everyone there.
Yeah. I mean, these are complex issues. And he's only in the intro. We haven't even got into the meat of the paper yet. But this is a problem that we see in Hannah Arendt's writing as well. Even the people who like Hannah Arendt mostly misunderstand her. And it's because there's a lot of moving parts to her model and they all depend on each other. So where do you start? Whatever you start with, you're going to misunderstand because you haven't heard the other parts yet that give it its meaning. And this is what's happening with Kenneth's thing as well. He's like, I'm going to talk about character types, but to talk about character types, I also have to talk about culture and I have to talk about society and I have to talk about all of these other things because they're all affecting each other. It's a multidimensional organism. Sorry, that was in my kitchen. It's a multidimensional organismic quality, and it means that we have to read these things more than once. Because the first time through, we're just going, what's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? And the second time through, we can start to go, oh yeah, that. Oh, I see that affects that. We can start to make the connections because we've met the characters, if you will, the moving parts. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, Nietzsche criticized socialism. And by socialism, he couldn't have seen all the different types of socialism. Fascism is a socialism, for example. But he wouldn't have quite foreseen fascism. The socialists had made themselves obvious in the internationals. And he comes up with this little line that, well, who knows, maybe humanity has enough resources that socialism can be, one of those great historical lessons, even though it's going to kill millions. But he had enough faith in humanity to think that they will eventually overcome socialism and learn the bad lesson. And so he predicted, the sort of, in the 20th century, there would be, a massive disaster. And people make a great deal about this, or some do. But of course, you look back and he had the perfect example in the French Revolution. It had already happened. You'd had a century of Enlightenment figures planning on making themselves the rulers with their Enlightenment values, their Banausic values, their technical ideas, that they'll go make the perfect society when they took power. France, under the Louis, had probably become the premier culture on the planet for that period, going from the 17th century through the 18th century. It was successful, so successful that the French population doubled from 1700 to 1800. And then suddenly, of course, every little Frenchman suddenly realised he was competing with a whole load of other Frenchmen for his place in the universe. So it's currently, look at our world now, the Green Revolution. Was a success. Look, we haven't got 3 billion people anymore on the planet. We're heading towards 10 billion. This is a success. So eventually the success becomes the seeds of the destruction later on. But, the Banausic minds like Voltaire got into power and they created the Reign of Terror. It's a bit like, it's not all that much removed from the Khmer Rouge when they took over Cambodia. Their grand ambition was taking over Cambodia. whether they could actually run a society was a secondary consideration. So the revolution continues. The French Revolution continues. There's an aim there. There's an ambition of creating the perfect mechanical society where everything's laid out and numbered. It's a result of the mechanistic outlook which suddenly arose with great strength in the early 18th century. Goethe complained. He became the romantic reactionary against the mechanistic outlook. But of course, the whole thing was prior to the mechanistic outlook. European culture had been naturally romantic. You go back to the time of, Queen Elizabeth. The court is full of romantics. You were a nobody unless you were a romantic, go and sit in your corner, you little frog, or something like that. When they look down upon the bean counter, go and sit in your corner. Us romantics will take centre stage, and we'll have the best outfits on and sing poetry to the Queen. And obviously, romanticism has its downsides. So there you go, the mechanistic outlook, which called itself the Enlightenment. There's your model for things going wrong. The French Revolution, well, they got Napoleon and he reinstituted monarchy. But it looks like in the long run, France never quite recovered. It spent the 19th century thinking that we are it. How did the British take over the planet? This is wrong. I mean, I think the British must have kissed Napoleon when they took him on the boat at the end of it, and I'll say, thanks, Napoleon, for handing us the world. Until the British mucked it all up by the First World War. But again, you look at the early 20th century, these were preceded by vast periods of growth. Weren't the peasants happy? Look, you've been growing for 50 or 100 years. Look at all the growth, and they're not happy. So there's a question. Why were the people unhappy with all the growth that somehow alienated them? Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. There's in Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism, she has a number of little epigraphs, one that starts the book and one that starts each of her three sections. And the one that starts the section on anti-Semitism has a quote from Roger Martin Dugard, Frenchman. And it's it's quite striking, actually, where he says, this is talking about the 19th century. This is a remarkable century which opened with the revolution and ended with the affair. He means the Dreyfus affair. Perhaps it will be called the century of rubbish. This is the French beginning with their grand aspirations and ending up with, this kind of great humiliation of corruption and anti-Semitism and on the world stage. One of the things she talks about is that the Dreyfus affair was resolved in the end largely because France was going to do the World Expo and the whole world was going to come, and they were humiliated that they were still digging through these issues of corruption in their own military and their justice system. And they're like, we simply cannot be having this happening in front of the whole world, that we do not have our act together on the basics. So we're just going to pardon everybody and put everything away and pretend that none of this ever happened. And they're like, wow, what a far cry from the, liberté, égalité, fraternité of the revolution, all the way to we can't seem to get our shit together. And the whole world is coming to watch us screw up in front of them. The one you were talking about just put me in mind of that quote. And that's the quote that she would pick out to head the entire section, is a Frenchman going, basically expressing disgust at what France did during the 19th century. So let's go back to the text. I know I'm not doing justice to your comment, but there's so much to be said. Second half of this last paragraph of the intro. Intervening Christian and modern epochs have purged not just the insights, but also the very vocabulary in which the Greeks framed the issue of human nature. This whole question of character types. We've talked before about how each epoch redefines all the most juicy terms that we use to understand the world and changes them from making sense in the old worldview to making sense in the new worldview. And we see um, we see some of that happening in, the transition from the ancient to the medieval world. We see that it happens with the patristic writers, the early Christian writers, who are writing first in Greek and then especially when they start writing in Latin. When Jerome creates the Vulgate translation of the Bible, and he does it because the Eastern and Western churches are are having issues, and they're splitting, and the Western church decides to stop doing things in Greek and to do things in Latin instead. But to do that, they need a Bible in Latin. And they have some bad Latin Bible partial translations that have been only meant for, scholarly notes and things like that. But they need one that can now be the main core. And so they have Jerome do this multi-year project to translate. He's this incredibly, educated guy. He knows his Greek, he knows his Hebrew, and he's going to translate the whole thing into Latin. And in the course of doing that, of course, Latin was never designed to convey Christianity. Latin was designed as the ultimate tool of the Roman Empire, the pagan Roman Empire. And all the juicy terms have pagan meanings, all of them. And so Jerome has to bend all these words. And by the time he's done and has created the Vulgate, he's also created a new Latin language in which, on the surface, it looks the same. But under the surface, the relationship of man and God and nature and free will and determinism and good and evil and all these things have inverted. They've all changed radically because it was the only way he could actually put the Bible into Latin. He needed to redefine the words, bend them, stretch them, break them in many cases, and in some cases coin new words. It was the only way. Hannah Arendt talks about this. She says, in this essay I shared before, and I knew I was going to talk about this today. She says, because I was so struck by how on point she was, it's like she prepared these notes for this very session. She talks about how the concept of history has changed so dramatically. She says one way to understand it is that in the ancient world, nature was eternal, but human beings were finite and mortal. That we are mortals was a central tenet of the ancient world. And it's why the afterlife for Greeks and Romans was nothing particularly enviable. You weren't even a person anymore. And it's why the Greeks had the idea that when your body dies, that's you. You died. And your soul is just the exhale of your breath and character. And maybe it goes to Twitter in the shades of Hades, but it's not like it's you. You're in the ground. So people were mortal and finite, and it was the cosmos and nature that was infinite. And she says flat out in this essay, and this is the thing that changed in the medieval world. They completely reversed it. Because now nature is finite. It has a creation date, and with Armageddon, it will have an end date. It is a finite thing that is bounded by a beginning point and an end point, and it has the inflection point in the middle of Jesus and his coming. And it says, and it is only people that are eternal because our souls live forever under Christianity. And the soul is the real us, not the body. And it doesn't matter that the body goes away because the soul will live forever in heaven and or hell, which is where you get your stakes for obey us or disobey us, and you'll pay the price. All of this stuff, it basically completely reversed which one is eternal and which one is mortal. The world is mortal and people are eternal under Christianity. But under the ancient world, the world is eternal and people are temporary. A 100% reversal. And all of that's captured in part in Jerome's translation of the Vulgate. These concepts of what does immortality mean? What does death mean? All these things, they're completely revised. The language is completely changed. It becomes medievalized. And so it is for us, right? This is what he's saying in this sentence. He's saying that we can't conceive of the way that the ancients see the world, but we can't even say the way that the ancients see the world, because every word that we try to use to say it has a different meaning that's incompatible with the ancient worldview. Just in the process of reading a sentence where we attempt to explain what Aristotle means by man as a political animal by nature, we completely miss his most central point, which is that it is in our character. Anyone can see, anyone can observe that it is the case. No logic is required. Aristotle is held up as the guy who worshiped logic and pushed logic on everybody. And here in this sentence, he's doing the opposite. He's saying, screw your logic. You can see by nature that this is what we are. This is the kind of animal that we are. The cheetah is fast and we are political. He's talking about where we fit into the ecosystem. Right. He's talking about what is the thing that is our peculiar excellence that we'd better cultivate in ourselves. Because if we don't cultivate exceptional politics in ourselves, it's like a cheetah that doesn't feel like running ever. It's going to have a hard time having a happy cheetah life if it refuses to run. Just like sub-political human beings, which is what Aristotle then talks about in the next section of the essay. People who pride themselves on not being political are basically saying they're inhuman. He says the only thing that can afford not to be political is either a god or a beast. And I don't know how to break it to some of these egotists, but they're not gods. So they're basically, when they brag that they're not political, they're basically confessing that they're not human. They're not living a mature adult human life. And he says, that's gross. Is the subtext of man is by nature political animals. It's gross. When people say, I don't need to negotiate with anybody. I don't need to talk to anybody. I don't need to be persuaded. It's egotism run wild, and it's a kind of savagery. So anyway, this is the thing is we can't even express what they thought. When we try to put it into words, a modern can't read the sentence the way that the ancients meant it. So we're missing all the context. He then reverts his final sentence, the end of the introduction, the end of paragraph 15. We have to revert to a concrete sense of the gestalten, or material forms by which human personality is bound, the specific ceilings on what individuals are capable of seeing and caring about and ordering their lives in terms of. In other words, forget about grand designs and escapist systems and theories about human nature. We have to look at the actual concrete people. How do they work overall? How do different people behave differently? And if we accept the evidence in front of us, we will stop trying to say that people are all the same, because obviously people are not all the same. Everybody knows people aren't the same. It's just when we feel obliged by the catechisms of our ideology to say we're all the same that we say it, and we'll even dig in our heels and argue the point, while at the same time knowing it's obviously not true. We're not the same height. We don't have the same eye color. we express ourselves differently. Some people want different things. I mean, we're obviously different. And what he's saying is, if you look at the sum total of human beings, you will find the Greeks found, and the Germans confirmed, and Arendt and Kenneth confirm that the Greeks are more or less right, that you find that people come in at least 3 different models, and almost everybody fits into these models reasonably well, and that the models are not systems, and you can't make logical deductions about people based on these models because people are not abstractions. But nevertheless, we have these gravity wells that we tend to orbit. And if we look at actual examples of human beings and see how they act, how they want, what they notice, what they care about, what kinds of cultures they generate, we're going to have an easier time figuring out, going to Joe's point, what is to be done now? Where do we go from here? We'll have an easier time figuring out because we'll know what the heck we even are. But as long as we pretend that the body's a machine and the mind is a computer and information is data and food is fuel, as long as we're thinking in those abstract Banausic terms, we'll never figure out how to get out of here. Those are the terms that point us back into the current order. And thus Lenin creates a country that ends up becoming capitalist, which is the thing he never ever would have wanted to do. He didn't see deeply enough. He didn't question deeply enough. All right. So this is what he's talking about. And there's some things about this that we should explore together in the time that we have left. And one of them is notice the paradox that it is our own intimate humanity inside ourselves, the part that most of us think is most us, our inner self, which is what's spinning out this vast, grotesque inhumanity. Right? In that, there are a number of things happening that are interesting and paradoxical. One of the things that's happening is that there's part of ourselves we've been in denial about. We've been in denial about how creepy some people are. We've been in denial about how much creepiness there is in each of us, but we've also been in denial about the fact that there is a type of character in Homo sapiens that really embraces the creepiness, loves it, doesn't see it as creepy, sees it as orderly and tidy, organized, systematized. They love that. And those people will make a different kind of government than we would like. And they can't stop doing it. They can't not do it. They need to do it. It is their own character writ large. And they can't not be true to their character, just like none of us can be not true, can be untrue to our character. This thing that's in humanity, that's in all of us to some extent, and in some of us to a great extent. This is kind of like the Oscar Wilde story, The Portrait of Dorian Gray. I don't know if you all know The Portrait of Dorian Gray, but Oscar Wilde, one of Kenneth's favorite authors, wrote a witty story about a guy who seemingly stayed young forever and was charming, and no matter what he did, he had the face of an innocence, and everybody found him appealing. But meanwhile, he had a portrait of himself up in the attic, and every horrible thing that he did ended up on the portrait instead of on his own face. The ugliness, the sneering, the pain, the suffering, the jadedness, and at first he was intrigued by the way his portrait would change, but after a while he couldn't bear to look at it. He just kept it. He just locked the door. He's like, if I don't look at it, it's not happening. But of course, it was happening. And what Dorian Gray is doing with this metaphor is it is our own character, if it could be brought out of the hidden depths inside of us where we can't see it and put out in front of us where we could look right at it and see it, would we like what we saw? How do our actions and choices affect the attractiveness and health of our character? And he made a nice little metaphor with Dorian Gray and his portrait. So the Holocaust and Stalin's gulags and the mass extinctions on the planet, the dead whales that are full of plastic bags because they're filter feeders and the oceans are now full of trash. All of this is our picture of Dorian Gray. All the ugly things that are actually part of our character, our current character as a culture, together, all of us together as a world culture, all of that ugliness is made manifest in things like the gulags or the death camps or the mass extinctions or the world wars, the what's going on in Iran and Palestine and elsewhere. All of these things, these are not things that just happen to be occurring. They're not distant from us. They're not separate from us. They are a mirror of the hidden part of us that the modern world has taught us to neglect and taught us not to cultivate and told us doesn't matter. And so not surprisingly, we haven't done a very good job gardening it. And it's pretty ugly. And the ugliness doesn't stay inside because we spin our subjectivity out into the world. And so the ugliness comes out into the world from inside of us. This is the whole point of his intro. This is the centerpiece. He doesn't cite Dorian Gray, but he likes Oscar Wilde, so I thought I thought it would be in keeping with his spirit to bring that up as an example. Another thing that's important, and this is a critical point. Consider the fact that we are at the same time that we're trying to deny that the Holocaust and the gulags and the mass extinctions have anything to do with us. These are just things that are happening. They're just mistakes. We don't want to acknowledge that this is our own character being reflected back at us. At the same time we do that, we also insist that we know what human nature is. So frequently you will see people who say, nothing will ever be better than this. It can't be better than this. We're not doing anything that people haven't always done. People were always like this. And we know this is human nature. So don't expect any better. Don't try any better. Don't try to improve anything. Just go along with it because this is human nature and it's just how we are. And what's interesting about that conceit, and it is a conceit that moderns have, is that it is in complete contrast to Aristotle's concept, which is that we have to judge each species not by its sickest forms, but by its most fulfilled, mature, and excellent forms, the ones that most clearly demonstrate its arete and its way of life, its bios. You can't You can learn some things about a cheetah by looking at a sick cheetah or a cheetah cub or an injured cheetah. There are some things you can learn, but you're never going to fully appreciate why the cheetah species evolved and what it's trying to accomplish until you see a healthy cheetah at the prime of its life chasing down a gazelle. And then you go, oh my God, it's not a leopard after all, is it? Spots aside, this is an entirely different animal with a whole different way of life. And now we see it at its prime doing the thing that it does better than any other animal. And we get that there's variation in the species and within an individual life, it goes from being born unable to do it to culminating and being able to do it and then being unable to do it again in its old age. We get that there's all these variations and there's all, but we see, says Aristotle, that there is a teleology to this species. This is the species that is trying by character of the species to generate these fantastic runners. And that's what it produces. And so he says, you've got to do the same thing with Homo sapiens. What are the most excellent, most fulfilled, most mature forms of Homo sapiens? And you don't know what human nature is until you see that. When you see Homo sapiens at its best, then you go, oh, that's why this species exists. Yes, there's all this variation. Yes, blah, 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 blah. But my goodness, look at that thing that no other animal does. I can see why this species is here. I can see what its excellence is. I can see how it would fit into the larger whole. I can see the reason for it. And if what you have instead is an epoch in which everybody is being stripped down to their most basal form to make them as manipulable as possible, to make them useful idiots, to deculture us and make us into consumers and producers, right? Fans, voters, all these trivialities that the modern political economy tries to reduce us to. If that's what you're judging human nature by, Aristotle would say you don't have a damn idea what human nature is. You are seeing it in a weakened, sick form. You don't know if that's all you've grown up with. You don't know what Homo sapiens is capable of. You're in no position to say nobody can do better than this. This is as good as it gets because you're seeing people as sick as they get. And it's like this is the opposite of what Aristotle recommends. We're not seeing people at their best. We're seeing them at their worst and then claiming that this represents their best. It's just egotism. It's a circular argument. Don't wish for anything better because you shouldn't wish for anything better because I say so. The full range of possibilities of what Homo sapiens can be is not something that we can judge from inside the modern world. And yet we're all taught to do it. And what we're taught to say is this is the best. Nothing could be better than this. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, the question of character. I mean, we're lauding the ancient Greeks here. Now, Oswald Spengler was making a point about the nature of times. He would say that that was a Greco-Roman epoch, and it had a certain character. Our culture arose out of the ruins of the Roman Empire. Our culture really starts with the Frankish Empire. That was the birth of Western Europe. And we have the Dark Ages first. That's the culture in the bud stage. Anybody would look at it and think, if you said, "Oh, look, 1,000 years from now, these guys will be dominating the planet," you'd go, "You're insane." Then its culture flowers in what we call the High Middle Ages. And then with the Renaissance, it begins to bear its fruits. Suddenly you see this explosion of trade vessels going around the world, of technology. And it culminates finally with the creation of a Western Caesar. We've entered the era of the Western Caesar now, the era of old age in this particular culture. But this entire culture, this culture that emerged out of the Franks, had its own type of character. So when you start comparing the character of the Grecian, ancient Grecian culture, there's a different character with this Frankish culture, which arose afterwards. So how do these characters differ? Because you can't quite put modern man, who's a result of the Frankish culture, into the mold of the ancient Greek.
Exactly. Thank you, Stephen. That's exactly right. And it's what we see when we do these cosmopolitan comparisons across time and space, we see that it is possible for people to be organized in radically different ways than we are organized today. And that those ways, they have their strengths and weaknesses. There are ways in which we're better, and there's ways in which they're better. And modernity is willing to acknowledge that there's ways in which we're better. But generally, modernity is not willing to acknowledge that there's ways in which they're better. We have our thumb pressed hard on the scales of evaluation when we judge this. And so the moderns have thus tried to resolve the differences between the possibilities for human nature by saying, okay, sure, other epochs might be different, but they're all worse, all of them. We're as good as it gets. And again, it's the circular argument that we're trapped in. But like Stephen is saying, the issue is from within the context of the culture that we're in, we don't know what's possible. We only know what's possible for us here and now. And if we want to talk about that, especially if we're doing cross-cultural comparisons like Kenneth's doing in this book, then we've got some basis to work with. But if we try to generalize, which abstracting, right, this is the disease of the modern world. If we try to generalize further and say, let us talk now not about modernity, but about all Homo sapiens and what they're capable of, well, we wouldn't know. We're the fishies in the water, and we cannot talk about the water. We do not understand the water. It's not even visible to us. And the point Kenneth made in a previous sentence was, it not only is that not visible to us, even the Greeks aren't visible to us. We look at them and it's a Rorschach test. We project our expectations upon them. We've redefined all the words, we've redefined all the concepts. We see them as caricatures of ourselves, and we can't see them as who they actually are. And that causes us to misunderstand what we're looking at. All right, so this is the key issue is that Aristotle's saying you can't look at, if you look at an epoch like modernity in its sick phase, you can't even understand modernity because you didn't get to see it at its best. So you don't know what modernity was most capable of. But also, you certainly aren't going to be capable of seeing what Homo sapiens is capable of. We pair that with Nietzsche, whose entire body of work is pretty much a condemnation of modernity as being not aristic, but as being human, all too human. His phrase for people in their slumping mode, their all the vices and none of the virtues. And about this, I come back to the way that moderns define the word normal. Normal. To an ancient civilization, normal refers to norms, and norms are things that you have to work to live up to. You have to better yourself to become good enough to live up to those norms. In the ancient world, you're growing up with the stories of Hector and Achilles and Odysseus, and these are your examples. And if you want to be a good Greek, you're striving to get as far in those directions as you can, even though that's above the typical person around you. That's what you're trying for. You're not trying to fit in. You're trying to arise. Aristic and arise have some relationship to each other etymologically. So normative was about rising to meet the demands of excellence. But what normal means to us now is average. Normal means typical, the normal curve, normal distribution. It's a statistical term. Normal is what people usually do. It's not about excellence. And so when people strive to be normal, instead of striving to be better than average, they're striving to be average, which means that when a certain number of them fail to be average, they're below average. When they fail to be normal, they're below average. If you were striving for exceptional norms and you failed, you might still be above average because the norm wasn't defined by the average. It was defined by these high goals. So we've managed to replace a driver of personal development that made people lift the bottom and lift the top and try to go upwards with something where the top is just slumping downward and downward in each generation. We're grading on a curve instead of grading by whether you actually learned the damn thing. And in a context like this is kind of what I alluded to earlier in the call. The highest possible virtue that we can feel a profound loyalty to is just not to get in trouble, to not be the nail that sticks up and gets hammered down. We take comfort from predators by hiding within the herd until normal to us means the exact opposite of what normal meant to Aristotle. And all of this is being driven by this dynamic relationship between character and culture that Kenneth's talking about here. These are the issues that are at stake. So I think we can skip this next thing. Yeah, I'm gonna skip over most of the comments I was gonna add here and come back to them at some point. Hamlet hiding in madness. Yeah. So we have a little time left, and I thought we might dig into the next batch of fragments that David found for us before and then next time we can start into the main body of the text when we've got a whole 3 hours to get into it. So let's start with this fragment that David found for us about iconoclasm, character, and politics. This is the first fragment. I'm going to have to split it in half to fit in the text here. So there's the first half, and here's the second half. And let's walk our way through it. This is Kenneth. I have never for a single day of my politically conscious life been in doubt as to whether there were fundamentally different kinds of personalities among us. Conscienceless and subrational, extrinsicalizing and deceitful creatures who, if they were utterly unimpeded, would exude and consolidate radically different species of society, so-called, to repress or exterminate their antagonist types. I saw what lengths and what pains academics went to for the sake of preserving intact the ideological and orthodox delusions of students about the character of power and order in our form of society. Let sleeping great beasts lie. I went to the same lengths and pains to burrow under those delusions and try to jack them up and tip them over like cows in the midnight fields. Always at the acme of those iconoclastic arguments, I delivered them with finesse and a magisterial suppression of my own consummate glee in perpetrating rationally structured and profoundly potent truths. I mean, right? Kenneth has always got a snicker. He's always got a smile on his face. When he's writing this stuff, there's a little bit of Loki or Raven or Coyote, the mischief maker, in what he's doing. To this day, multitudes of my former students have no idea what my own innermost politics or morality or religion is like. I understood how to empathize with all perspectives and traditions and cultures, how to turn them this way or that for extraordinary revaluations. Nihil humanum alienum a me. Nothing human is foreign to me, Terence. And God, how futile was most of that scrupulous work of explanation and penetration. So he's talking here about the issue of character and politics, about the way that a given type of character will try to manifest itself within politics. It'll try to change the political system to be comfortable for it. And the result of making it comfortable for it is to make it uncomfortable for the other character types. And so you end up with this struggle between the types for who gets to express, who gets to feel at home in the political economy. For whom does the political economy operate in the same key as their own character so that there's a harmony? And for whom does the political economy operate in a different key such that you end up with dissonance when you try to operate with it, and it just rubs your skin wrong. It feels wrong. It's like this is where some of the dynamo of change in societies and cultures over time comes from, is that it's not possible to make a society that feels equally comfortable to all three character types. You can do your best to acculturate people, and you can do your best to acculturate the culture itself to accommodate the variety of human experience. And there's certainly more successful and less successful ways to do both of those things. But at the base, no matter how hard you try, one or another character type is gonna have some indissoluble residual dissatisfaction. And that's eventually going to come out in things like Solon's overhaul of the Athenian constitution to give the vote to the traders, which culminates in the Peloponnesian War and the destruction of Athenian society. Because, it wasn't enough to live a lifestyle of comfort in which you had almost all the same things that the Aristoi had. You also needed to be in charge as a Benausos. You needed it. You felt like you needed it. That one thing you were deprived of was one thing too many. Now, I was not there. I couldn't directly witness. I can't say whether the testimony is true, the testimony of the Persians who came to Athens and said that they hated it because they couldn't tell who the slaves were and who the free people were, because everybody dressed with, equally well, and everybody seemed to have mostly the same rights, and that the differences were subtler than that. The Banausoi couldn't vote. But nobody was whipping them in the streets. They weren't being dressed in the shabbiest of clothes so that the slave owners could feel like, look at me, I'm the master. That kind of stuff that we see in American history of slavery, the Persians say that they did not see in Athenian slavery. And the reason that we might trust their judgment on this is that the Persians hated this part of Athens. This isn't something they were praising Athens and trying to cover up its defects. They wanted to see the differences between the classes, like you could in Persia, and they hated that you couldn't in Athens. So, sometimes your enemies are the people that you can trust to tell the truth about you. Maybe it's not true, but this is the intelligence we have. This is the information that we have. And if they're right, if that was the case, if the main difference was that the Benausos didn't get the vote, then what we're talking about is that the Benausos could be rich, they could be powerful, they could have material comfort, they could have just about anything they wanted, and it wasn't enough. They wanted the vote. And when they got the vote, they wrecked society. If Thucydides is right. So all of this is kind of being alluded to here. Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I mean, something that struck me when you were talking about, kind of seeing the world from different perspectives, like in all different political perspectives and belief systems and things along those lines. And you're kind of relating that back to what you were saying, that how It's not that moderns didn't get anything right. It's that what everybody got wrong. Everybody before them got something wrong. And that type of mentality, it's interesting because you start to believe that you have all the answers and that you're just trying to get somebody to convert, right? So you just need to come to the right side, as opposed to really inquiring as to why is it that you believe this in the first place. And so that's a really important distinction to make, because one is about a genuine inquiry, whereas the other one is more about domination. And so I think this is where you kind of see that even colonizing type of perspective, that it's your culture that's the right culture. And even the idea, well, what is really right, to begin with, you're not even asking yourself that question. So I think it's an important point, because the ability to ask the question, as we were talking a little bit earlier, the procedural aspect of it is the output of that type of thinking, is that I have the solution, here it is, and now here are the procedures that go along with it. Here's the manual. And if anything deviates from that manual, then it's obviously a problem. That's the problem, not what we're doing. And so again, it's taking that, what we talked about last week, that subjective perspective, as if you have some like model of the world that is absolute, and making it the objective. And that's where you kind of see things go really wrong. And the more information that we can process, I feel like it becomes a bigger and bigger problem, because what we determine to be progress at that point is only aligned with material goods, to be quite honest, which are not to be ignored, but also not to be idolized. So anyway,
That's an excellent point. Yeah.
I
It's
appreciate
it. Yeah, thank you, Joe. It's a problem that we moderns have inherited more from the medieval world than we want to acknowledge. It's, whether you draw the lines the way Oswald Spengler does or the way Kenneth Smith does, either way, you end up with a recognition that there is an enormous amount of continuity from the medieval era to the modern era. We may have overthrown God, but we kept a lot of the rest of the medieval framework. And part of what we kept is genocide. The idea that there's one right way, and it happens to be our way, and everybody else has to change. And if they won't convert, they need to die, because there's only one right way. This monomania, monolatry, that we would apply it not only to God and religion, like the medievals did, but even to languages. There are people out there who are like, English is the best of all possible languages. Nobody should speak any other languages. The sooner other languages go extinct, the better. And of course, all of this ignores the truth that every language can say certain things better than other languages can. So every language that goes extinct, Homo sapiens has lost the capacity to express some things that we used to be able, that's at least some of us used to be able to say. And we've lost the capacity to think about some things that some of us used to be able to think. But this medieval concept of there can be only one leads people to celebrate the death of languages as though it's progress. There are people who celebrate, and they do it more, in the last 15 years than they used to, but who will now openly celebrate the extinction of other animal species because they think that survival of the fittest is a zero-sum game. They think that what evolution is driving towards is one single species will exist on Earth and everything else will be gone. And that's how you know who the winner is. And in fact, if they don't see other species dying, then they feel insecure. How do I know I'm the winner unless that species is going extinct? And it's really important to them to exterminate those. There's moments from our history in the modern world when when human beings have been caught on record crushing the last eggs of endangered birds underfoot and sneering at them. Ha ha, who's the winner? Who's the loser? I win because you lose, which is just the stupidest way to think about the world. And yet we can't seem to stop ourselves from doing it on every possible front. It's that medievalism in us that we can't really question or understand. It's fascinating.
Has Kenneth written extensively? I know he has. I've read obvious things that we've covered here about languages, though, in particular.
Yeah.
Has he written like a paper like about that specifically? Okay.
Kenneth hasn't written a separate paper on this as far as I know. But it's a theme that I see come up over and over. And
yeah, it is. I mean, something that you do start to see, even the concepts of eternity, where he's challenging what those concepts are and how they've been redefined. In a way, he's challenging the language and the viewpoints and the orientations of people.
Right.
So yeah, he always covers it. I was just wondering if
he hadn't singled it out.
Yeah.
I mean, really, you just have to watch the movie Highlander.
Right.
There can be only one.
Right.
You know, and what happens when there's only one? When one of them chops the head off the other one, there's a huge special effects flow of power into the killer who has a giant fantasy orgasm on the screen.
Yeah.
And that is the dream of the medieval genocidal impulse. If I could just get rid of these others, I will feel a rush like no one has ever felt before. And once everybody's dead, then I win. I'm the winner and I have everything. Yay. The end.
Right.
The more you watch it and you think about these philosophical phrases, the more this absurd B fantasy movie, which, you know, I grew up with and I loved it when I was a kid. And it really is the perfect illustration of the insanity of the there can be only one mindset. And yet we can't, for all that we think that we're rationalists, we can't seem to question it. We can't stop ourselves from trying to make there's only one economy over the world. There's only one government over the world. There's only one race over the world. Thank you, Hitler. I mean, it's just like there's only one class over the world. Thank you, Stalin. I mean, everybody, there's all these people pushing that there can be only one. And the amount of damage they do is obvious, and yet they just can't stop doing it because they got to scratch that itch. There could be only one.
Yeah. Who was in the book on tyranny, where he says, you know, essentially one of the rules, and he outlines a set of rules, and Timothy Snyder, and he talks about one of them is being beware of the one party state. So it is that exact problem.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, the Greeks talked about this. They said the victory of the one is the death of competition. And without competition, the culture stops arising. It's why if there was one person who nobody could beat, they'd exile him. Get out. The rest of us need to improve. We can't do that while you're here winning every medal. Go somewhere else. Go find someone who can compete with you. And then you can improve. But as long as you're only competing against people you can beat, you're not going to get any better either. So, you know, it's the same reason why there's weight classes in boxing and why there's belts in karate. Having the black belt beat up all the white belt does nobody any good. You know, the black belt needs to be sparring with other black belts to learn something. And the white belts likewise with other white belts.
Well, and that's directly related to having to be absolutely right.
Yes.
I mean, I need to be right. I can't be wrong. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't lose.
Right.
As if losing there was no lesson in that.
Yes. Thank you, Joe. Well, let's do another one. We've got time. Let's do the second one on philosophy. And there we go. And I don't know where David found all these. I recognize a number of them, and I'm sure Donald recognizes some of them too. We've seen them in the mailing list over the decades, or sometimes in this book or that essay or what have you. This one I've called philosophy. The very plurality of human perspectives and values. And by the way, I did not understand when I first read this fragment. When he says plurality, he's invoking Hannah Arendt. Oh, I understand something I didn't used to understand, because plurality is one of Hannah Arendt's key words. It's her response to totalitarianism and tyranny and other things like that. She says, you know, These systems do not understand plurality. The human condition is not a condition of there can be only one. It is a condition of plurality. And if even if you got every living person to all have the same thought, the very next baby born has just eliminated your monomania. You now have somebody who didn't sign on to any of the agreements and has a whole new set of ideas. She says plurality is a direct consequence of natality. And political systems that can't handle plurality and can't handle natality, they can't handle the real world, they can't handle the human species, and they're not long for this earth. All of that is caught up in this phrase plurality that he's using here, in the very plurality of human perspectives and values. Oh, Kenneth, there's Hannah Arendt all over this stuff. Should set a very daunting and humbling challenge for anyone who attempts to think. And now I'm appreciating the extent to which that also is a Hannah Arendt issue. She talks a lot about what counts as thinking, what doesn't count as thinking. The last book that she was writing when she died was literally on her typewriter. She was working on the third part of The Life of the Mind. She came to understand that many of her theories about totalitarianism, about fascism, about Marxism, about politics, these things were incomplete unless she also addressed how do people think, what is thinking and what is not thinking, and how do we need to discipline our minds in order to be capable of rational thought. So I see now that's two Hannah Arendtisms in that first sentence. I did not see those last week. I sometimes wonder whether half enough people are discouraged by the enormous challenges of philosophy and religion and culture, because far more than modest or mediocre curiosity is demanded of those who want to pursue these issues. A superhuman passion for whole-mindedness should be the bare prerequisite. When he says whole-mindedness, he's talking about don't just use noesis, don't just use gnosis. You have to use gnosis and noesis, even though each of them is seducing you all the time, like an angel or devil on your shoulder, trying to lure you into, no, don't listen to that other one, just listen to me. He's like, but you have to resist and use your whole mind, even though the parts of your mind don't want you to do that. You have to. Superhuman passion for whole-mindedness should be the bare prerequisite, i.e., you have to be heuristic. But that is something I rarely saw around universities. Most people nest comfortably in their fragmentary perspectives, never feeling any hunger to try more exotic food for thought. Most are too intimidated and conformist to permit their minds even to wonder about whatever the many has defined as forbidden fruit. Yeah, the fact, as a number of readers have said over the years, I get my lists of books to read from the banned books list. If there's something you think I should absolutely not read, I definitely want to know what's in there. And what he's saying here is, what can you say about someone who is so conformist or intimidated that they will let some group tell them what they're not allowed to think about or read about or talk about? Well, what can it mean to not even be curious? To know, why don't they want you to read that? What's in it that they don't want you to see? Why? Because if you don't know what's in there, you can't start asking questions like, what is it about the way that society is organized that's threatened if I read this and understand this? And what does that say about whether society is justified? Maybe society should change. If it's got this gigantic Achilles heel that's so fragile that people even thinking this thought leads to its destruction, maybe it needs to be replaced with something that's not such a house of cards. Maybe. Kenneth, again, the mischief maker, is all over that last sentence. And the one before. How could you not be curious? How could you not want to explore? So, and hiding in this is also Nietzsche. And Hannah Arendt acknowledges that Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are heavily in her work. But here we see Hannah Arendt, we also see Nietzsche, because what does Nietzsche say about philosophy? Philosophy is only for the healthy. The sick it has ever made sicker. Philosophy, according to Nietzsche, is not something that can fix your bad character. It's something that if you have a bad character, you will distort philosophy into something sick. A banausos will encounter philosophy and internalize sophistry instead, and then promulgate sophistry on the world, which makes the world worse instead of better. Because in the flatland of the banausic worldview, the dimensions that make philosophy have there's nowhere for them to be. The Procrustean bed has no space into which the philosophical dimensions of philosophy can exist. By the time you flatten it down into that Procrustean bed of the Banausos, what's left can't even be called philosophy. This is what Nietzsche's trying to say. That's being echoed here. And this comes as a disappointment to people who are excited about philosophy, who always fantasize that philosophy could be the cure for the world's ills. I mean, Plato was kind of hoping that philosophy could be the cure for the world's ills. I mean, in the Republic, the idea that, we could use philosophy to fix what's wrong with the world. And Nietzsche is far more skeptical when he says, you hand philosophy to a doulos or Banausos, and they don't get better, they get worse. It's like the problem of Oedipus, having more power than the rest of the Thebans resulted in him doing more damage than the other Thebans could do. It's curious, and what's in that it's I'll call on you, Stephen, in just a second. But hiding in this is an interesting thing, because it's not that the Greeks believed that philosophy had no role to play in making a better society, but rather that it wasn't by spoon feeding philosophy directly to Douloi and Banausoi that you were going to get anywhere. It was mythos that you were to encode the philosophy within, because the mythos, as with its story structure, could be apprehended by Douloi and Banausoi, and they could take in some of its nutrition. Whereas if you hand them the philosophy, all they could do is bend it into something sick. This is all subtext, right? This is subtext in the Nietzsche quote, and it's subtext in what Kenneth's saying here. So yeah, Stephen, go ahead. What's on your mind?
Oh, well, it's not this immediate question, but the whole big question here. David and I have had some slight discussions about this, and he said I should run this past Rick. But it's a question: can you make a silk purse out of a pig's ear? Is the famous quote, isn't it? And I'm saying that there is the potential for the let's say the Aristoi. There is some sort of seed form in any personality, even if they wouldn't make a very good one. Now, this, of course, the modern liberalism says, like Walt Disney, when you wish upon a star, you can become anything. This is this whole exercise from Kenneth Smith is contradicting this idea a little bit, saying it's a question of the materials, that you can't make a silk purse out of a pig's ear, but it's the question is, all right, we've got the rudimentary qualities which some sort of nature creates, but what is the cultivation of the Aristoi? Exactly. So in ancient Greek times, apparently, we're not absolutely sure, but there was some sort of cultivation of the Aristoi going on. That was probably pre-democratic Athens in particular. This was a high art. Democratic Athens did its very best to get rid of it. So we already have that lesson in Athens. It got rid of aristocracy. The popular, everything good comes from the popular. What the masses want is the very best thing, which is what people are saying today.
Yes.
Whether it's left or right, the lefties are screaming populace at the moment, and I'm thinking, I was a lefty for years, and if I remember correctly, it was the left that was on about popularism before anybody else. So the mass of humanity, everything it says is the perfect answer.
That's
right.
We
only have to listen.
The wisdom of crowds. Crowds never make mistakes. The mob with the torches and pitchforks is always the wisest. They're whatever they say goes.
So there's a question of character there.
Yeah. Well, and
But
and your point is really important here because the challenge is, do we know which people are pig's ears versus which people are the
so
larvae of silk purses? Right, some of the people that if there are processes of development here by which people, acculturate and become more mature, then just because somebody is at a certain level doesn't mean they aren't capable of more. But it also doesn't mean they are capable of more. Some people are and some people aren't. It depends on their character. And we can't see their character, and they may not understand their character well enough to tell us. And so we have this challenge. If we treat all the douloi as though there's nothing more in them, as though there's no more potential, then maybe we don't have any Aristoi ever again. But if we treat them as though they're all precious, precious snowflakes and they're all going to become Aristoi, then we're going to be again disappointed because some of them are going to stop as douloi, some of them are going to become Banausoi and stop there, and only some of them are going to go on to become Aristoi. It's that thing that great teachers have, the quality that's missing, which is where you have to have your mind alive to the actual student in front of you and how they grow and change over time and pay attention. And that's the only way to find out what someone has in them because there's no way to know in advance. It's education is a very complicated business that requires a lot of focus if we're to get the best out of people.
well, at the moment you've created a mass education. How many people
Yeah.
go to tertiary education in America today?
Yeah.
Now, there is a claim that now the educational standards are being lowered.
Yeah.
So we can't have, a minority of people coming out as the A's
Right.
and the vast majority coming out as the C's. We can't have that anymore.
No.
All must be equal.
That's right. We're all the same. It's obvious. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind. You get the final comment tonight after Stephen. Oh, Stephen, how could you let Donald by? Well, here he is. Go ahead, Donald.
And I have a very quick
In the-
question at the very end.
In the last paragraph, Kenneth uses this word whole-mindedness. And I just want to say that's more important to him than I used to think. He views human beings, I think, as a collection of powers and abilities, and that the philosopher or the heuristic needs to understand the capabilities and limitations of all of those abilities. It's not left brain versus right brain or appetite or we'll go with Arendt or Rent. Thinking, willing, judging. The mind, the person has powers. You must know them. You must be whole-minded to ascend, the sort of personality ladder or whatever, character type ladder. And certainly, I just think that's a very important concept. We're not looking at human beings and say we've got to suppress this or we've got to understand what we have and how it can be used to advance us. That's enough. Jenny, I'm going to be quiet.
I'm just curious. Did anybody hear anything about Phil Chan? I was just curious.
He's all right. He's focusing his efforts right now on Ukraine.
Ukraine? Phil
Yes.
Chan?
Yes, yeah, Russia versus Ukraine. He's involved in associations trying to, do charity and outreach work for Ukraine.
Well, that's good for him. Oh my goodness.
So,
That's good.
yeah,
Thank you for that.
of course. I emailed him and we chatted for a bit. So yeah, Donald's point, I definitely don't want to forget it. The whole-mindedness thing is incredibly important, and it's reflected in Arendt as well. This idea, Arendt has this idea that she doesn't get into until the final chapter of Origins of Totalitarianism, and then after that, she starts developing it in all of her future books. This idea that part of what happens under totalitarianism to someone who's either exceptionally victimized or who joins the movement is that they lose that whole-mindedness. They lose the dialogue with themselves. She says the dialogue with yourself is so important because as long as you can have a dialogue with yourself, you're never truly lonely. You always have someone to talk to. It's you, but you have someone to talk to. You can bounce ideas off yourself and react to them. And that feeling you carry around with you, a little feeling of community. She calls it, she has the phrase 2 in 1. That people think that they're a unity, but they're not. That there's multiple voices within them, and that they can be a person only because they can both be alone and together at the same time. She says, but what happens in when you buy into an ideology, it discourages you from those internal conversations because you're not supposed to think the things that are not allowed by the ideology. And people end up, instead of being a 2 in 1, they become a 1 in 1. And she says that one of the fundamental experiences of the totalitarian personality is a huge, astonishingly intense loneliness, and that they don't understand themselves, why they feel that aching need. And it makes them want to join, to become joiners, because they need the movement to supply the other half of the conversation that they no longer have with themselves when they ceased to be 2 in 1 and became 1 in 1. So this this subtext that Hannah Arendt has that she talks about that's so central to her analysis of the human mind and in totalitarianism, it becomes, yeah, alienation. That's right. It's clearly central to Kenneth as well when he talks about this whole-mindedness and the not suppressing your gnosis, but also not suppressing your noesis. He's talking about having a three-way conversation. Your sense of self stops being your thinking. Your sense of self stops being your feeling, and it becomes a third thing. And that third thing can have a dialogue with the thinking part of you and with the feeling part of you. And the three of you can chat. And between you, you can figure out where the defects are in your ideas and feelings and come up with a better way forward. There's a community, an internal community. That means that an Aristoi is never really lonely. And if we follow what Arendt writes in the Origins of Totalitarianism, she's basically agreeing that that represents the mature adult form of the human mind. We're supposed to be able to be together and alone at the same time. It's essential. Anyway, thanks everybody. I hope you had a good time. I had a good time.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Rick.